Yo, welcome to part 5 of this series of, Has Been Hotel Deku. Y'all want to see more? The part 6 will be out, with the movie that's being released next. If y'all want to see it, get this video to about 20 likes and it'll be out the next day. Thank you all for watching this series and being here with me, and I hope you all enjoy. She had to admit, the kid was good. He was getting progressively better at combat exercises and had good planning. The last exercise was what really sold her on the idea of taking the kid on as her intern. The kid showed good forward thinking, being one of only 2 teams to even think about communicators. He also showed adaptability and critical thinking, letting him quickly react to new scenarios. And finally, his combat skills spoke for themselves. Even though Jolt was holding back quite a bit, he would have still been a difficult opponent. That fact was heightened when she learned the villains for the exercise were tailored to take away the team's biggest strength. Team 1 faced off a telekinetic, removing their only heavy lifter. Team 2 had to deal with an EMP quirk, blocking all comms and causing a breakdown of strategy. Team 3 had left before the villain made contact, so Mirko had no idea who was chosen for them. Team 5 had a rainstorm, preventing 2 of the members from using their quirks, and a third to have limited functionality. Each team struggled with the heroes eventually being forced to hit the button to end the exercise. Team 5 even had lost some points due to the damage inflicted. Only Team 4 managed to effectively lock down their villain, and not only continue to score points, reached the highest point total before ending it with a bit of time to spare before the villain became a real threat. That fact was due to Midoriya's skill and leadership. If she was hesitating before, this exercise had proved his worth to Rumi. The kid was good, really good, and she knew he could be better. And his determination held strong throughout every training exercise. She cracked her neck, backing out to US Hero Network. Clicking the option to send an internship offer, she began filling out all the necessary steps for the offer. It was a relatively easy enough affair. Fill out her hero info, her agency info, add her address, some extra information. There was a description, but she didn't think explaining to Yua why she wanted the kid as an intern was all that important. Plus, if they wanted her to write something, they should have made it a requirement to submit the offer. Clicking send, she stood up from her desk. She turned around and surveyed her apartment for a bit. She had 3 rooms, one being a bedroom, one an office, and another being used for random storage. She'd have to clean that one out then. Probably put it in a warehouse or something. None of it was important enough to need on hand anyway. She would need to get a bed, and a futon just in case. Probably a desk too. Would she need to get a computer, or did he have a laptop? Fuck, just thinking about it was making her regret this already. But she had made up her mind. She'd have to get started now. Only a week left after all. Oh. All right, class. You may have noticed the laptops on your desk. Aizawa was standing at the podium, looking at least slightly more awake than normal, which was odd. These are intended for school, but they are yours to keep, so as long as you can still use them for that, do whatever else you want with them. As for why you're getting them, you'll have received some offers already, and will likely be receiving a few more over the rest of the week. He instructed the class to boot them up, how to change the profile and password, and then directed them to the HeroNet. Here you can log in and check your profile. You'll be able to edit your bio, add tags for what kind of work you want to do, something you can do on your own time. He stared down the class for a moment before continuing. Up in the top right is an envelope symbol. Some of you may have a blue notification symbol on the corner of it. Click the envelope. Clicking the envelope, Izuku realized it was similar to an inbox for an email. There were multiple sections on the left. Alerts, assignments, messages, news, and temporary inbox. Offers. Aizawa told them to click on the offers section. This section is where you will receive your internship offers. Some of you may have multiple already, and you'll likely get more as the week goes on. You will notice that the first one you have is titled UA Affiliated Internships. Aizawa went on to explain how these were default internships. Everyone could intern under these heroes, even if they got no other offers. You may have noticed other things in your inbox, such as comments or news. These are related to the other facets of your HeroNet profile. Aizawa directed them back to their profiles and to a post under their accounts. These are your training exercises. Heroes who were interested in you could view these to better decide whether they wanted to make an offer or not. Some heroes also left comments under these recordings, likely advice. Many heroes can point out room for improvement without needing the responsibilities of hosting you for an internship. You can reply to these, and you can also message heroes directly. He heard slight whispers from Kaminari, and immediately activated his quirk, silencing him. Do not abuse that fact. It is intended for you to have efficient communication, not to talk to your idols. If they have not initiated contact, whether by commenting on a recording or sending an internship offer, do not message them. He took a breath before continuing. If you have questions about an internship offer, then you can ask them. If you are replying to a comment they asked, you can easily do that. Heroes have been made aware that you have received your offers today, and that we will be helping you with any general questions. That also means that if they are genuinely interested in your potential, they will make themselves available to answer any questions about your potential internship you might have for them. He heard a knock from the door and went over to open it. Behind it was Midnight. I am too tired to deal with you all day, so Midnight will be helping you out with any questions about internships or the HeroNet you might have. He then grabbed his sleeping bag from where it was rolled up in the corner and left the room. Shaking away his curiosity, he navigated back to his inbox. Excluding the default offers, Izuku had received 9 offers. His eyes went wide looking at that. He had done enough that 9 different agencies wanted him to intern with them for 2 months. He also noticed he had a few direct messages, not just comments. Deciding to get them out of the way first, he looked at them. One was from Jolt, which he decided to read next. Hey kid, like I said on the rescue training, nice fighting and nice leadership. Ordinarily I'd have sent an offer to you every time, but a week is way different than 2 months. Not to mention the differences in what you're allowed to do. My agency just can't handle that right now, sorry. I do wish you luck though. Your skills aren't to be underestimated. I'm sure you've caught the eye of some agencies who could probably do a better job at teaching you than I could anyway. Hope to see you out there soon, Stormwind. Izuku felt a grin stretch across his face. It was one thing to hear his classmates call him by his hero name, but for it to be recognized by a top 50 hero, that felt way more real, and it was yet another thing that reminded Izuku that it wasn't just a dream anymore. He looked through the other comments. There were only 2 more. Skimming through them, Izuku realized they were from 2 of the agencies in the default list. Both of them wanted to let Izuku know they would have sent him an offer, even if they didn't send a class-wide offer. So Izuku resolved to look closer at those agencies. He figured that if they wanted to send him an offer regardless of a guaranteed one, they could probably help him more than it might otherwise imply. Opening his offers, he looked at the ones he had received. 2 were from small-time local heroes he had looked up quickly. Their quirks seemed like they could help him, although it appeared that they wanted to host him more for his manpower than any teaching he might receive. Another 3 offers were from mid-range, slightly larger agencies. The 2 default agencies also fit into this category. 2 more agencies Izuku had to do research for. He eventually used the Hero Net to do so, and learned that both were underground agencies. Apparently, his low-light training exercise, along with his tactical thinking, had convinced them he could do well in that side of heroics. Izuku debated the pros and cons of that before moving on to the last 2 offers. One was from a top 20 hero, Fulgaris, who had an electricity manipulation quirk. Their offer made it seem like they might be able to help Izuku enhance his quirk even further. Izuku was sorely tempted by this offer. If it were just a week, he would completely ignore rank, looking for the better teacher. But for 2 months, the top heroes had to put in a lot of time to get where they were. If they were willing to sacrifice nearly 2 months of that to help him, it was a good enough sign they would do everything they could to help him. Keeping Fulgaris's offer in his mind, he moved on to the last offer, which was from... What? There is no way that's real. There had to be some sort of mix-up or technological error or... Izuku took a deep breath. He looked at the offer again. It was pretty simple, given that there was no description or anything. Just the offer itself. An offer from the number 7 hero. An offer from a hero who had never taken interns before and was quoted on disliking working with other heroes. An offer from Mirko. He looked up and raised his hand. Ah, Miss Midnight. She looked up from her manga and leaned forward. Yes, what's up? Izuku blinked for a second, looking down at his computer for a moment. I got an internship offer that's just blank. No summary, no description, just the offer itself. I don't know if they even meant to send it, to be honest. Midnight turned her head slightly, looking at the ceiling in thought. Why don't you send them a message? Let them know you received an offer from their agency, but aren't sure if it was an accident or not, and just wanted to make sure that you were actually meant to receive it. Izuku paused, thinking about it before nodding. Thank you. I'll do that. Midnight gave an acknowledgement and turned back to her manga. Izuku hesitated slightly before going to Maruko's page and began typing a message. Hello, this is Izuku Midoriya, or Stormwind. I am messaging you because I received an internship offer from you, but the description was completely blank. Obviously, it wasn't necessary to add one to send an offer, but I just wanted to double check that you did intend to send the offer, and that it wasn't done by accident. If it was, there's no harm, I have other offers. You don't even have to reply to this. If I don't get anything back, I'll assume it was an accident and accept one of my other offers. Izuku leaned back in his chair, thinking about the other offers. He was torn between Spectre, one of the underground heroes, and Fulgaris. On one hand, Fulgaris's experience could help him, but Spectre's different perspective could also help. He certainly wasn't expecting the soft chime he heard from his computer. I meant to send it. Are you telling me the description was for you to figure out your options and not just for your teachers? A short, curt reply from Maruko. She did confirm that she had meant to send the offer, though. Izuku could hardly believe his eyes. She was actually sending him an offer. She just assumed that the description wasn't for him and left it blank, because it didn't seem important. He took a moment to compose himself before sending a reply. Yes, that's correct.
We get the descriptions so the agencies can tell us what they want to help train us on and why their agency might benefit us. Most were just simple explanations of their agency. Again, within a few seconds, he received another reply. Izuku could hardly believe that he was having a full conversation with the No. 7 hero right now. Huh, that one's on me. Probably should have figured. Obviously, I want you as an intern, as I said earlier. You've got spirit, drive, and determination. I can tell how hard you work, and it's impressive. That combined with your obvious combat intuition is why anyone would send an offer to you. As to why you should accept my offer, for one, I'm the No. 7 hero. Not that it invalidates other heroes, but I certainly didn't get here through luck. I also want to train you on both your quirk and combat skills. Obviously you're improving your quirk, and while it might not be a one-to-one match with mine, it could push your physical capabilities close. I also noticed you've been using your legs more in your training. It's not exactly a secret that I'm good at using them, and I'd be able to help train you in using them better. She stopped writing and Izuku took the time to process this. Mirko wanted him as an intern, not just because of some flimsy thing like power, but because she genuinely believed she could help him be a better hero. He had to admit she had a point, a really good one actually. He already knew how to improve his quirk at least a little bit. Combining that with her combat techniques would be terrifying. Me interning with you wouldn't mess with your duties as a top 10 hero. She replied quickly once again. Nah, honestly, with as highly weighted popularity is for the hero rankings, you interning with me might actually bump me up a few ranks. As for my actual hero work, I'm not a station hero. Yeah, my agency's technically located in Shibuya, but I'm more of a mercenary hero than anything. Izuku blinked. Despite being a hero nerd, station hero and mercenary hero were two concepts he'd never heard before. What does station hero and mercenary hero mean? Shit, that's right, those are hero terms, forgot civvies don't hear them. A stationed hero is someone who stays in a specific area. Heroes with large agencies and a lot of sidekicks are often stationed heroes. They do patrols, get to know the people in the area, and become a familiar sight often enough. Mercenary heroes are basically what it sounds like. We're given contracts to take down dangerous villains in groups and go there to deal with them. Most of the top 10 are considered mercenary heroes on their own, while their agency is considered the stationed hero. Izuku took a moment, realizing what she was trying to say. So like Hawks. He's always seen all over the place in Japan, but his sidekicks are only really seen at Fukuoka, where his agency is. Bingo. Hawks goes out and deals with the high-priority villains, while his agency keeps the peace nearby. Me being a mercenary hero means that some of the contracts or cases I might get will be given to a different hero during your internship. Would be a lot more difficult to deal with that if I was stationary, because villains don't just stop showing up because I have an intern. You being there means we'll stick closer to the city for the targets I do get, though there might be one or two exceptions. And you're sure that you want me as your intern? Why not someone like Bakugo or Todoroki? Why have an intern in the first place? Aren't you a solo hero? Izuku had to ask her. Any other top 10 he might be able to understand, but Mirko was notorious for hating teamwork. Normally, yeah, but I like your attitude. I don't like working with other heroes because half the time it feels like they don't take it seriously. You work as a hero, you have people's lives in your hand. That means you have to fight with your all every moment of every fight, not just in terms of your quirk, but also your motivation. I'm not against working with others as a concept. I just haven't met someone who I work well with. And you think I might be someone who you do. Keep that determination of yours, and yeah, not even a question. Izuku had to take a moment to breathe. This was a lot to take in. He had just been given an offer from the most isolated hero in the business, and she claimed he was the only one she might like working with. That was a lot of pressure. All right. The thing about Izuku, though, was that when pressure pushed down on him, he didn't falter or stumble. He held his ground and pushed back, getting stronger every time. This was yet another time where he would either grow or shatter, but he would never be able to reach his best without pushing himself. So with that, he clicked on the accept button from her offer. The gym was nothing like he had assumed it would be. Despite his lack of muscles before Yua, Izuku had actually gone to multiple gyms before. They all seemed to cater to a specific type of mutation or quirk thought, and none of the ones nearby had what he needed. Solid Steel Gym, however, seemed to cater to everything. There were sections of massive gym equipment, which were being used by people with mutations that increased their size. There was some kind of firing range type area, where people were training with their quirks. There was standard gym equipment and modified equipment for more common major mutations. Rumi hadn't stopped, merely nodding at the man behind the counter at the door, who barely glanced up from his work. She continued walking down to a massive door on the other side of the gym. High output area was written in large letters above it, and exercise caution was written slightly smaller below the first line. Rumi walked up to the door and pulled it open. Gesturing him inside, she stopped just inside the threshold. I'm letting you in here because you've been in more dangerous situations before, but you need to be careful in here. This is the high output area. Any ideas about what it means? Izuku thought about it. Mirurumi had mentioned they were going to be training with their quirks. While the machines out there could handle most people, the strength that Mirko had was likely greater than they could handle. Add in the dangerous aspect, and it was likely this area was reserved for the stronger, more volatile quirks. Izuku explained so to Rumi. Rumi nodded, a smirk on her face. Knew you were more than just a meathead. You're dead on. The machines and arenas here are designed to withstand even some of the strongest quirks out there. Even Endeavor's flames barely sear the training bags here. It also means you gotta be vigilant, because the wrong step here could get you seriously hurt. Got it? Izuku nodded. Yes, I promise to be careful. Good. Rumi walked to one of the corners of the room and to a large circular mat on the floor. This is our arena. You and I are gonna spar. I need to test your skills in a fight myself to know just how much you can handle when we go on patrol. Izuku's eyes widened. He had assumed he would spar with her at some point during the internships, but right away, Rumi laughed at his shocked expression. Calm down. I'm not gonna go all out against you. I'm not gonna be a pushover either, but I'll match you. Just need to see how far you can push me. Izuku relaxed slightly. He stepped into the circle at a gesture from Rumi. She then looked up and spoke again, this time not at him. System, activate sparring mode. A robotic voice called back at them. User identified Mirko, activating personalized sparring guidelines. Suddenly walls of blue light rose from the outer edge of the ring, connecting to a mirrored ring on the ceiling. Izuku jumped, not expecting that. Easy kid, Rumi said. Her hands were in her pockets, but her tense legs betrayed the calm facade. She was ready to fight. It's a hard light ring. They need to be stationary, but it works well for thing like this, because I can't break it no matter how hard I kick. Her relaxed face suddenly broke into a menacing grin. I hope you're ready. She lunged forwards, her legs blasting out, sending her flying towards him. It was far slower than her normal, but still much faster than any normal person. Izuku lit up in sparks of green, Storm Veil and Eye of the Storm charged at 5%. The sparks coming off of him licked the ground as he pivoted on his foot, dodging Rumi by less than an inch. Tap. Her left foot stretched down, touching the ground just behind him, before sending her spinning into a front flip, right foot swinging backwards and slamming right under his right arm. The force was enough to send Izuku flying upwards, and he barely managed to point his feet flat at the hard light wall before he landed on it. Pushing off, adding a twist to his jump as he did, Izuku aimed straight at Rumi. She leapt at him, intent on meeting him halfway. Having expected something similar, the twist of his jump put his leg in the perfect position. Waiting until the last moment, Izuku then stretched out his leg into a kick, with the momentum of his spin being transferred into the outstretched limb. The added energy had his kick slam into Rumi's shoulder just as she raised her forearm to help take some of the impact. Smart, I'll need to keep that one in mind. She had landed first, and had already darted back at him, her foot slamming into his back, sending him flying again. She was hitting way harder than he was. Blocking wasn't possible, and deflecting wasn't the best option. The one benefit Izuku had was his mobility. Mirko was fast, extremely so, but her legs were designed for explosive, straight outwards kicks. This meant that she could blast forwards, but changing direction took effort. Izuku, however, had better directional control. A simple dash sideways of his was leagues faster than her own. Head-on was a losing battle. Izuku knew full well he wasn't a full frontal fighter. His idol being All Might, though, had kept those approaches at the forefront of his strategy book. Anything else was a conscious effort, but he had no chance of winning like that. Landing on the ground, Izuku blasted to the side at a 45-degree angle, Rumi having lunged at him already. Her foot was only 6 inches off of the ground, and he knew just how fast she could launch herself again. She saw him dodge and knew where he was. In order for her to turn fast enough, she had to start moving her body weight now, meaning she would immediately push off, without any time to react to what was actually happening. Izuku dashed straight at her, low to the ground, and sure enough, as soon as her foot hit the ground, she slammed it back down, twisting as she flew right at him. She obviously was expecting him to have tried dodging even slightly, and was caught off guard as he was inches away from her. Izuku, being so close to the ground, used it to put even more force into his swing as his shin slammed into her stomach, sending her off course. He couldn't let up on the pressure. If he wanted to stand any chance, he needed to keep her window of opportunity as small as possible. But with his lower half of his body now swinging upwards, his options were limited. His palms hit the mat and pushed out, sending him backwards and allowing him to plant his feet for a proper jump. The issue was that he was now facing the wrong way. Using the momentum, he jumped again, performing a backflip over Rumi, who had lunged at him. He hit the side of the arena again, feet first, and launched himself at Rumi. She had gone a bit farther than he expected, likely intentional on her part. Landing right in front of her, she quickly lashed out with a knee upward. Izuku avoided it, just barely, and sent a kick to her side. She turned her body and their shins collided. Her raised knee then viciously kicked forwards, slamming into his chest, sending him sliding back a few feet. She didn't let up though, and dashed at him, quickly closing the distance. Her arms turned as she leaned backwards, catching herself slightly with them. Her legs tensed before they suddenly stopped, bending downwards to catch herself. Stop. Izuku halted his motion immediately, stopping the kick he was about to send into her side. Rumi pushed herself onto her feet and nodded at him. Not bad. Had to stop myself there, otherwise I'd have broken, or at very least fractured your bones with a kick there. Almost got me to actually start trying." She sent him a grin before calling out to deactivate the hard light walls. "I can tell how much you can handle in a fight now, though. I don't think I need to tell you not to get a big head or anything, but you handle yourself about as well as most average pros. It means that for most fights, I can trust that you can deal with it." Izuku looked shocked. "Wait, what? I'm still just a hero student. There's no way that I—" He was cut off by a small towel landing on his face. He pulled it off to see Rumi with a slight smile. "Listen, kid, I know that you've got confidence issued. It's pretty hard to miss." She walked over to a bench a few feet away and gestured next to her. "Especially given your quirk coming in so late. I got my fair share of shit for my mutation, and even that was still way better than most. I know how hard it is to believe in yourself when you're the only one who does." Rumi sighs, looking up at the ceiling for a moment, thinking. "But here's the thing, kid. You aren't the only one anymore." She turns to look at him again. "You're in UA. Your teachers believe in you. Your classmates believe in you. Even random pros out there believe in you. And if all that still ain't enough, I believe in you. That's why I took you on as an intern, because I saw your potential and I wanted to help you grow." Izuku began tearing up as she continued. "You're a good kid, real good. Only a first year, and yet you are already on par with most small-time heroes. Doubting yourself will only hold you back. Don't overthink it. Just do. All you can ever do is what you're able to. Nothing more, so it doesn't matter if something lucky happens or if you get a good chance. You won't be able to pull it off if you haven't put in the work, so when you do, own it, accept it, and use that inspiration to fuel your next accomplishment." Izuku had started crying by now. Rumi huffed lightly, mumbling to herself. "They did warn me this might happen." She put a hand on his back and spoke to him. "Let it out, kid. We can get back to training once you're ready. For now, though, do what you need to." Shouto stomped his foot, releasing a blast of ice in the direction Firefight indicated. He quickly saw why, as a blast of fire on his right sent a villain flying into it. On the other side of the wall were civilians who were attempting to evacuate the nearby area. He was in his new costume for the first time, and was glad that it had yet to hinder his abilities so far. He wore a Roman-styled armor, with his left arm uncovered and his right being a fully armored gauntlet. His legs were fairly armored, with his left having slightly less armor than the right. It had a red cloth and silvery blue metallic color scheme. The most noticeable part of his new costume, however, was the mask. It was a colorless white mask, with a similar design to his sun and moon face. His left side seemed to be a face from straight on, when combined with the right side, while the right seemed to be a face seen from the side when seen on its own. Together, they combined to make the Mask of Janus. Working with Firefight was interesting. When he first got to his agency, Firefight showed him around quickly before suggesting that they go on patrol as a tour of the area. Firefight obviously wasn't expecting the sudden attack of trigger junkies. Seems that the two of them had gotten a bit too close to a drug deal for their taste, and decided to preemptively attack. Seeing as Firefight didn't know his capabilities, Shouto was put on civilian defense. He didn't mind. His fire, while powerful, was still dangerous. It was why he had chosen Firefight after all. His father could have taught him about fire, but far too often villains came out with burns. None were too bad in the grand scheme of things, only the worst receiving any scars, but even the thought of lightly burning someone still made him pause. Firefight, on the other hand, despite using flames, seemed to prioritize the burst of force they could deliver rather than the heat they had. It was less dangerous that way. It also meant that he could use his fire for more than just to harm. For now, though, using his ice for defense was his job. One of the junkies rushed at him while Firefight was taking on 3 others. Shadow was quite proud of how far he had come as a person since starting at UA. He learned how to talk with others and not to fear his flames. Perhaps the most important lesson, however, was his arrogance disappearing. He was still far better than most his age could say, but Midoriya, Bakugo, Yaoyorozu, and a few more of his classmates could keep up, and even beat him, not to mention how far behind real heroes they all were. No longer did he believe that his ice alone would win him any battle. No longer did he believe that no matter the foe, he would triumph. He had been punched in the gut by reality as he was left breathless without his delusions. He could not afford to underestimate a foe, especially not here, especially not against someone on trigger. The junkie leapt at him, muscles visibly rolling from what was likely some type of strength enhancer on overdrive. He had no idea just how hard the man could hit, and he didn't intend to find out. Flaring with fire and purposefully missing the man with a blast of fire scared the man enough to jump back a bit. He was still airborne when the wall of ice Shadow was preparing erupted from the street, encasing all but his head. A crack could be heard as the man's muscles fought against the glacial prison. Shadow was a bit worried. The same trick wouldn't work twice. That was when a burst of orange light slammed into the back of the junkie's head, and Shadow turned slightly to see Firefight holding a flaming revolver, fire scarf billowing behind him as the fight ended. Firefight was a taller man, coming from Texas before he moved to Japan. He was tall and had dirty blonde hair with brown eyes. His costume was based off of a cowboy. He had leather boots with flaming spurs, a large dark brown duster, and a bandolier. Combined with the goggles, bandana, and cowboy hat he wore, it hid his identity subtly but well. Part of that was helped by the last 2 pieces of his costume being so eye-catching. He held dual revolvers made of pure flame in each hand, and flowing behind him was a long scarf of fire. The subtle glow from the small parts of fire on his costume gave him something akin to an aura. As he stood, gun outstretched, scarf floating behind him, Shadow knew what made him so popular. Even he, who prided himself on rarely being caught off guard, couldn't help the slight awe he felt at the sight as the dust from the fight settled. A flash went off, and a second later Firefight moved again, pulling zip ties from a pocket and beginning to tie the villain's hands together. Shadow walked over to him, ready to help, but Firefight heard him and spoke before he could offer. "Sorry about that. Normally this area ain't so bad. Dunno what's gotten into these fools." He shook his head slightly. "Dumbasses," he muttered to himself. Zip-tying the villain's hands, he turned around and stood up. "Suppose now's about as good a time to explain this. Presentation. As a hero, how you present yourself is important. For example, posing." Shadow scrunched his eyes in confusion. Firefight didn't seem like the attention-seeking type though, so he waited for him to continue. "A pose is about more than just looking cool." Firefight spoke in a slow drawl. "Remember, every action we take as a hero is out for the world to see. It's why we have to be careful about panicking and showing fear. Civilians hold us on a pedestal. Every action we take is magnified tenfold in the populace." He took a breath for a moment and turned to look over his shoulder at the crowd before continuing. "A pose lets them know they're safe. Simple as that. If you're confident enough to pose after a fight, it means they never really had anything to be afraid of. You don't pose in the middle, not when the villain can still hit you, but afterwards, whether they know it or not. Seeing a hero pose lets them all calm down because they instinctively know the danger is gone." He turned back to Shadow. "I don't have a set pose, but I always try to make my movement for that last shot be just a little more flashy. If they go down, I hold the angle, let the dust settle, my scarf wave, and give them time to realize that it's over." The police arrive on scene and Firefight claps him on the shoulder. I don't just intend to teach you how to use your fire, kid. I intend to teach you how to be the defender of these people's hopes and dreams. Watch from me, and when you're ready, you'll know. He walked off towards the police to help get them up to speed, leaving Shadow stunned. A protector of hopes and dreams. His lips curled into a smile before he even realized it. That was the kind of hero Shadow wanted to be. The kind of hero like All Might, like Firefight, and like Izu. No, like Stormwind. Curling his right hand into a fist, he stared at it, more determined than ever, and as he let a small flame ignite in the palm of his left, he truly began to realize just how much these flames of his could do to help, rather than harm. Oh. Tenya had to admit, Midoriya and Aizawa-sensei were right about letting it out. Originally, he had planned on interning with Manuel, the ordinary hero, as he was in Hasu. Midoriya had convinced him to talk with Tensei, and somehow his brother seemed to know. He convinced Tenya that revenge was not a hero's motivation. They can want it, they can hope for it to come about on its own, but a hero must never let it drive them, for they will stray too far from the path they have set out on. Tensei was right. Somehow, despite everything, he was still fairly happy. When Aizawa-sensei asked him to pass along that crude message, he had doubts, but he believed his teacher wouldn't intentionally do something to hurt someone. When he eventually was able to tell Tensei, after making it extremely clear they were not his own words, Tensei started cracking up like Aizawa-sensei had suggested he would. Apparently the two were friends in high school, along with Present Mike and Midnight. It would explain the crude humor. It was nevertheless terrifying to have to honor his brother's request to send a message back to Aizawa-sensei with the exact language his brother used. Aizawa-sensei, sir, I have a message for you from Tensei. He wanted me to say it word for word, so I will apologize for my language beforehand. Aizawa had looked at him before sighing. You're all good, kid. Knowing Tensei and knowing you, the words about to come out of your mouth are word you would never say otherwise. I'll blame Tensei, not you. Tenya had nodded, but still felt nervous about his next words even now. In that case, Tensei would like me to tell you, and I quote, "Very funny tabby cat. Don't you worry, I've got all the motivation I need for my PT now. By the way, the end goal is to kick you ass myself." Tenya finished, and he still could not believe his teacher's reaction had simply been to huff out a laugh and mumble that he'd like to see him try. Ingenium. A gruff voice called him from his thoughts. He turned to his right to look at his mentor, Railyard. He was a gruff older man, with a large black beard with hints of white creeping through. He was wearing a brown leather bomber jacket, and blue overalls could be seen under it. On his head he wore a blue and white striped hat. The man seemed to be in half costume. It was a term Tenya only knew from his experience with Team Initen. Half costume was when heroes who were not secret about their identity went out in plainclothes with a similar look to their hero costume. It was used when a hero was out on official hero business, but wasn't combat related. That way, if a fight started, the hero would be more likely to be recognized by law enforcement, but it was subtle enough to seem as an ordinary citizen if you weren't looking. In this case, Railyard, or Shigeru Kuki, as he had asked Tenya to call him, was on the business of introducing him to the agency's central station. They specialized in speed and vehicular quirks, allowing them near complete oversight of the Japanese transportation systems. While none of the individual heroes were especially highly ranked, the agency itself was one of the most important agencies in all of Japan. Railyard, one of the higher-up heroes who was planning on retiring soon, seemed to want to help train the next generation with the years of hero work he still had in him. As the two stepped out of the car, which was parked in the agency's underground garage, they walked to the elevator. "I spoke with your brother a bit before your internship. We used to work with team in Dayton and him quite a bit. We can use what we know about his quirk to help maximize the potential of yours." Tenya blinked. "Oh, thank you, sir," he said weakly. Shigeru nodded. "Not a problem, kid. You're here to train as much as possible. Gonna try and help as much as I can." He paused, seemingly debating whether or not to say something else. "I'm sure you've heard this 100 times before, but I'm sorry about what happened with your brother. He's a damn good hero, didn't deserve it." Tenya blinked. That was the first time since the attack that someone hadn't used that phrase in the past tense. Sir, he has severe nerve damage. Even if he can manage to walk again, he will never be able to do hero work again. And, unless someone does something to deserve them being stripped of the title, once a hero, always a hero, your brother saved hundreds of lives during his service. Just because he can't anymore doesn't mean he wasn't a hero to those people. Your brother is and always will be a hero, even if he can't fulfill the duties he once could. Tenya thought about it for a moment before nodding, eyes tearing up slightly from pride in his brother. "Then I swear upon my family that I will do his name proud and continue the heroic legacy of Ingenium, so that he may be remembered as a hero for many years to come." Shigeru smirked slightly. "There's that fiery determination. Use that heat to power your engines for the fights to come. There's a lot of work to be done to ensure his legacy." He turned fully to Tenya, stopping at the threshold of the agency. "But so long as it keeps burning, no amount of snow on the tracks can stop you now." Of the subcategories that have been classified, the Animalia subcategory is by far the largest. However, it is also one of the more inclusive subcategories. The Animalia subcategory is classified as any mutation that replicates in animal species in both behavior and medical purposes. This separation is distinct from quirks that mimic another species, as those quirks are often superficial. For example, someone with a cat's face, but no medical conditions exclusive to cats, such as allergies, is simply a mimicry mutation. Someone with a bird quirk, however, may have hollow bones in their respective mirror species' dietary restrictions. Animalia quirks make up nearly 40% of all mutation quirks. They are also far more common than simple animal mimicry mutations. Important things to note about Animalia quirks is that their behavior, diet, and genetics may be altered from a standard human, and as such must be treated with caution. It is for this reason that many hospitals employ staff who are also trained veterinarians for consultation of Animalia quirks. Because some species have different reactions to drugs and foods to baseline humans, these cases need to be treated very carefully, as something that may ordinarily save a life may end it when used on the wrong patient. Animalia quirks are also often far more versatile than standard mutation quirks, often giving many more degrees of abilities. For example, someone with a snake jaw quirk may be able to unhinge their jaw or have venom. Someone with a snake Animalia quirk, however, will likely have both of those abilities, along with scales, modified eyes, better scent receptors, a slower digestive process, and may even be cold-blooded. That is a true example of what the differences are between mimicry and Animalia quirks. The names have been withheld to keep privacy, but the mutations detailed are all true. To summarize, Animalia quirks are one of the most populous subgroups of quirks, and are one of the major reasons why subcategories of quirks need to be official and recognized legally. Original author, Hiryu Mewtwo, from his book, A Greater Perspective, which he had yet to finish before he lost his battle with quirk-based gene degeneration. Training with Mirko was odd. After their spar, they mostly did baseline tests to see how much his physical abilities improved when he was using his quirk. Turns out they increased by an extreme amount. Even Rumi was slightly impressed at how much his quirk enhanced his abilities. They had retired back to her apartment after picking up some food once training was done. Izuku had time to rest afterwards and grabbed his phone to text Todoroki and see how his own day went. Izuku Midoriya. Shouto Todoroki. Hello, Midoriya. My internship has gone well so far. Firefight seems to be a good mentor. He gave me my probationary license. Has Mirko given you yours yet? Izuku Midoriya. No, she hasn't. What is it? I assume it's different from a provisional license? Shouto Todoroki. Yes, it is. As Firefight explained to me, provisional licenses allow us to use our quirks when an emergency situation arises, whilst probationary licenses allow us to use our quirks only when under direct supervision of our hero mentors. You'll likely get yours before you go on patrol. Izuku Midoriya. Oh, did you go on patrol today? Shouto Todoroki. I did indeed. Firefight took out a group of trigger junkies. I aided civilian protection. He also taught me a valuable lesson about how heroes have to present themselves. Izuku Midoriya. What was the lesson? Shouto Todoroki. That civilians react to your outward appearance, and that maintaining a calm and relaxed demeanor is important, as it helps give everyone help. Many actions are also unconscious signals of something to civilians, and that heroes often use them to manipulate civilians' actions sometimes. Izuku Midoriya. That's actually a really good insight about the spirit of heroics. I'm glad your internship started off good. Shouto Todoroki. It did. How did yours go? I remember you mentioned sparring with Mirko. How was that? Izuku Midoriya. Enlightening. She was holding back a fair bit, and when I suddenly jumped up in power, it surprised her enough she had to call off the spar. Otherwise, I get the impression I might be in the hospital at the moment. I'm apparently super strong though, and I wasn't too badly hurt by the spar, just the normal bruises. Shouto Todoroki. I had wondered if her schedule was as strict as Endeavor's would have been. Firefights was not, so I wanted to see if Maruko's was. It's still possible it is, but it seems that once again Endeavor is simply a taskmaster. It is rather late, however, so I intend to retire for the night. I hope tomorrow goes well for you. Izuku Midoriya. Thank you. You as well. Get a good night's sleep. Izuku yawned as he turned off his phone. He looked at the time and realized it was nearly 10. Considering he had been up since 4 a.m. that morning, and then had done a bunch of training, he was surprised he had even lasted this long. Putting his phone on the charger, he fell asleep. Waking up in a different room was a bit jarring, but Izuku realized where he was after a moment. Checking his phone, he saw the time was almost 5:45, about when he would normally wake up. As he got changed and left his room, he heard Rumi call out from the kitchen. Morning, kid. Was gonna wake you at 6. Seems you already did that yourself. Izuku rubbed his eyes before waving. Good morning. I'm used to getting up early to catch the train. Body just woke up on its own today. Rumi nodded approvingly. Good. Sticking with a schedule helps. Grab some breakfast. I've got cereal, eggs, and some rice in the fridge and pantry if you want it. Izuku nodded slightly, still fully waking up. Okay, thank you. No problem, kid. Izuku walked over to the kitchen and grabbed a bowl of cereal and some milk before sitting down at the counter next to Rumi. On the TV in front of them was a news broadcast of a local station. On it, a reporter was in front of a growing crowd. They seemed to be setting up some kind of stage with boxes and wood that the group is bringing. Coming to you live from Shibuya South Central, I am in front of a process that is forming. It seems that this has been in the works for a while with how prepared some of these people are. Izuku looked to Rumi, who seems to have a slight scowl on her face. Sir, would you mind giving an interview and telling us what this protest is about? The reporter had turned to a plain-looking man in the crowd, who smiled and nodded. Sure, always happy to help spread the word. We're members of the Quirk Free Usage Group. We believe that quirk usage shouldn't be restricted to just heroes, and that many quirks could be used to help society advance even further than it has. Izuku thinks for a second when Rumi speaks up. Once you're done with breakfast, get changed into your hero costume. She points at the TV. That's where we're going today. Local heroes requested some backup. QFU as a whole is pretty normal as far as activist groups go, but their ideals also attract some nutjobs who don't give two shits about the law. It'll be our job to keep them from hurting anyone. So we're running security, Izuku asks. Bingo. We've got Floodlight and Wave Dash with us, but both are small time. It's pretty likely that if a fight does break out, you and I are going to be doing the most. Izuku's eyes go wide. Me too? But they're actual heroes, right? Rumi snorts. Yeah, and you're better than both of them. Floodlight can blind people, useful if they mob us, and Wave Dash can dodge attacks. If anyone in that group has trained their quirks though, which knowing QFU some of them definitely have, then you and I are the only two with takedown skills to handle them. She looks at him. I told you yesterday you can handle yourself. I meant it, kid. If we get in a fight, I trust you can hold your own. Izuku blinks as his cheeks flushed, embarrassed at the trust Rumi already has in him. He looks down at his lap and his gaze hardens. Got it. I'll do my best. Rumi nods. Damn straight. She puts her hand in her pocket, pulling out a card and hands it to him. On it is a picture of him in his hero costume. It say his hero name, his age, class in 1A. But the thing that really gets him is the agency section, where he sees Usagi Agency. It's Miruko's own agency, and only exists as a formality, or at least it did. Now, Izuku has become the first official member outside of Mirko. Once again, the reality of the situation hits him, and he can hardly believe it. He's knocked out of his musings by Rumi nudging his shoulder with her own. You earned it, kid. She stands up from the bar they were sitting at. Go get changed into your costume as soon as you're done eating, she says as she walks into her room. A few minutes later, both of them are in their hero costumes, and Rumi has her signature grin on her face. Ready, kid? She asks him. She receives a determined nod, but she can see his nervousness in his eyes. She puts a hand on his shoulder. I believe in you, kid. You should too. If shit gets too much, I'll be there to bail you out. But I don't think I'll have to. You're good enough to hold your own, whether you know it or not. So let's get going. She sees as his eyes regain their edge, as he dials in his focus, and then sees when they glow with power, as small green lightning flickers from his pupil and arcing across his eyelashes, as he seems to see. All right, she hears, and she can feel the raw power toned down and tamed, but still there. This kid. Oh. They're nearly at Shibuya South Central when they begin to hear the crowd. As they reach the edge of a roof overlooking the square, it is absolutely filled with people. There's nearly 200 people gathered there. Someone walks onto the stage and is handed a megaphone. Miruko's eyes sharpen slightly as she fiddles with her communicator. Izuku hears the moment his and Miruko's communicators sync with the other heroes there. Ko, glad to have you here. A male voice calls out. Mirko turns her head slightly. and Izuku can make out a figure on the other side of the square, waving a hand. It's clearer than it would be without Eye of the Storm, but he's still too far to make out much. Same here, always happy to have more backup. A female voice calls. Rumi doesn't react, and Izuku doesn't spot anything either, so he assumes Floodlight is hidden somewhere. God knows these idiots are getting bolder. She mutters to herself, but the mic picks it up anyway. Wait a damn minute, who's next to you? Wave Dash questions, astonished. Izuku looks up to Mirko, who nudges him, as if telling him to answer himself. I'm Stormwind, the Thunderstrike hero, and I'm Miruko's first intern. He says in what he hopes is a confident voice. As he looks up to gauge her reaction, he's greeted by a grin and a nod. Holy shit, kid, that's impressive as hell. I'm looking forward to seeing you in action, if you're good enough to impress Mirko. Oh, you really think something's going to happen? Not even a question. Floodlight interjects. QFU has been getting bolder and bolder. Last time ended with quirk usage for celebrations. It's why we have riot police on standby, and something tells me that these guys aren't just gonna let themselves get arrested. Yup, me and Floodlight'll help out where we can, but Floodlight's a crowd controller, and I'm an endurance fighter. If multiple of them go AWOL, we'll be counting on you too for most of the takedowns. Izuku opens his mouth to respond when suddenly his attention is drawn to the man on the stage. He seems to have just tested the microphone. Combined with his enhanced hearing, it makes sense it might startle him a bit. But taking a glance at Mirko shows that she's just as tense as he is. Welcome, everyone. First off, I would like to thank everyone who has shared their stories with us today. For our cause to have any merit, we need as many perspectives as possible, and those perspectives come from your experiences. As the man begins to speak, Izuku can feel the hair raise on his arms. Something about this man is dangerous, not in the sense as a fighter, but Izuku can see the crowd changing. A man with scales covering his neck, a woman with detached hands, a metallic-looking figure. 347, he's riling them up. His words are striking chords with them. He sees what Floodlight and Wave Dash were talking about. You see it too? Mirko whispered to him. Huh, Wave Dash called over the comms. Izuku ignores him, responding to Mirko instead. He's intentionally riling them up. I count 7 that seem on edge, could be missing some. Mirko nods. Good. You're right. I don't know why, but he's intentionally trying to incite a riot. He's pressuring them to use their quirks to fight back if they're going to get arrested. The man continues to talk, and every word out of his mouth is more dangerous than the next. It's all fairly mundane things to a normal activist, but to the extremists, it's a call to action. He keeps speaking, but a subtle nod to someone Izuku didn't notice before sends them slinking through the crowd towards the edge of the police barricade. And then it's chaos. The man touches another protester near the police, and Izuku hears a gunshot and watches the man goes down. Not a single muzzle from the police lit up. It's staged, but the crowd doesn't know, and they erupt. The crowd screams, shouts, and yells echoing through the square as terrified protesters surge to the opposite end, out of the square, while the extremists fight against the tide, heading straight for the police. Mirko yells out to him over the noise. Stormwind, down there, now. She leaps, and her feet land on a wall above the police before she drops down in front of them, giving the extremists pause. Izuku hesitates for only a moment before he leaps after her, landing in a roll and popping up next to her. It's barely enough time for the extremists to regain their wits, as 2 of them, one with a severe bear mutation, and one who extends her nails into sharp claws dash at Mirko. The third, the woman with the detached hands, runs at him, anger in her eyes. It's brutal and it's bloody. Protesters are screaming in fear, police are holding off their own extremists, and Floodlight and Wave Dash are occupied on the other end of the square. The woman's hand shoots towards him in a fist. Izuku dodges it and launches towards her, but as she pulls her arm back, her fist slams into his lower back, disorienting him. She runs forward, detaching her left hand to swing it in an upward arc aimed at his jaw. This time he expects it and twists. She pulls her hand again, and Izuku crouches, her fist flying through where his head was. He rockets after it, slamming a kick into her side. "Surrender now," he yells. He doesn't expect it to work, and when she spits at him before launching another fist, he isn't surprised. A glance at Mirko shows she's taken down the two from earlier, but another two have replaced them. His hand shoots forward, and her fist slams into his open palm as he closes his fingers around it, holding tightly. Her eyes widen, and she yanks back, desperately trying to wrench her hand free. Izuku is pulled with it, twisting his body, and his foot slams into her lower neck, sending her reeling backwards, directly into an officer, who tags her with his stun baton, knocking her out cold. His hair raises again, and he drops, sweeping a leg out behind him, nailing something in the shin. At the same moment a ray of electricity passes over his head. He turns around, rising. The metal figure is standing there, trying to balance themselves, after having one of their legs kicked out from under them. Their right arm seems to be changing back from some kind of cannon, presumably one that fires the electricity. "Stormwind, you doing all right?" he hears over the comms from Floodlight. She's Maruko's intern, of course she can handle herself in this. Wave Dash responds for him, thankfully, as he's unsure if he can speak without risking biting his tongue right now. He slams a fist into the stomach of the metallic figure, but it barely seems to dent it. Its left hand then grabs onto his right and flings him across the ground. He can hear something charging up and rolls to the side as yet another bolt of electricity slams into the floor where he once was. Looking up, the person's face is furious as it changes its arm back into a hand and sprints at him. Izuku dashed forwards, just barely around him. Izuku remembers Mirko using Lunar Blindside to hit a foe who thinks they're safe against him just yesterday. He needs to come up with a name of his own. A sudden attack out of nowhere. Mixed with his storm motif, he has the perfect name. Flash Flood. His left foot springs off of the road, and he spins in a front flip. His right swings backwards, landing heel first on the back of the robot's head. They're sent sprawling as Izuku lands. Stormwind. He hears a call from the police, and sees a pair of handcuffs being thrown over their line, directly between him and the robot. Twisting and jumping, he catches it midair and lands, slamming a foot into the robot's back as he tried to get up. Quickly wrestling its arms behind it, he handcuffs it. An officer breaks the line and pulls them back through into the van, nodding at him as he does so. He turns and sees the man with the scales staring at him. The man opens his mouth, and Izuku can see a spark in the back of his throat. A jet of flame soared over his head as Izuku barely ducks in time. When he looks up again, it's to see Mirko landing a foot on the side of his face, sending him into a group of riot police with shields. They seem to have been expecting it, as they absorb the impact and part as another officer handcuffs him. Only then is he given the time to breathe. Only then does the fight end. Most of the civilians have fled, and the few extremists who remain are being dealt with by the police. Less than a minute later, and the street is calm compared to the unrestrained chaos it just was. A hand claps onto his shoulder, and he jumps, whirling around. Mirko is standing behind him, a vicious grin on her face. "Two of 'em, on your own. Not bad, kid. Not bad at all." Izuku can feel the adrenaline leaving him. He's tired and breathing heavy, but he's okay. He can give a slight grin. I did that. Maruko lets out a huff. Damn straight, kid. And you were worried you couldn't handle it. She punches him lightly in the shoulder. Then she switches her comms off, which also turns off his own. Don't tell them this, but you kicked more ass than Floodlight or Wave Dash did. Both of them struggled to take even one of the rioters down, even with help. You, on the other hand, bashed some serious skulls. Izuku's eyes go wide. Wait, what? Maruko grins sneakily and turns her comms back on. Floodlight, Wave Dash, you two mind handling the media this time around. Might be too much stimuli for my intern all at once. Want to at least seem like I'm easing them in. Floodlight responds first. You got it, boss. Izuku can almost imagine her saluting to Maruko, wherever she is. I completely understand we've got it. Just a warning, though, you do know the media will be worse the longer you put it off. Maruko nods. Not that Floodlight can see it. Yeah, but I gotta at least get some PR training in first. Wave Dash laughs. Hell of a debut, kid. Nice job, Stormwind. Pleasure working alongside you. Izuku blushed, although thankfully it's hidden by his mask. Oh, you two, Wave Dash, and you Floodlight. Maruko decides then is the time for their dramatic exit, leaping up to the rooftops next to them. Izuku, not quite adept, has to scale the walls of the alleyway to reach the top, and they disappear from the square just as news vans begin pulling up. Oh, Izuku knew hero work was exhausting, but he had not expected it to be as mentally draining. There seemed to be a massive difference between training and real combat, even though Izuku had been pushed harder during training. It seemed the knowledge that it was real was enough to really push him to his limits. Yet another thing to work on. And now Wave Dash, as one of 4 heroes present at the Shibuya South Central incident, he's here to give an interview on what exactly happened. So, Wave Dash, anything immediately stands out to you? Well, it has to deal with Maruko more than the incident, but I'd suspect it's a bit more surprising. The reporter raises an eyebrow, and their smile becomes predatory. Oh. Wave Dash grins. Yes, see, Maruko being here helped keep everything mostly organized, but the other person keeping things as good as they were was her intern Stormwind. The reporter openly gapes as he says that. I'm sorry, did you just say Maruko has taken on an intern? Wave Dash nods. Yep, and Stormwind certainly lives up to her mentor's legend. She was like a mini Maruko, bunny and all. Izuku Blue screamed. What? Did Wave Dash just call him a she? What made him think that? Maruko turned to him, pausing the TV. Kid, you good? What's up? Izuku blinked. Does Wave Dash think I'm a girl? Maruko paused. Yeah, he said something along those lines during the fight, or at very least used female pronouns. Oh, Maruko fully turned her body. You want me to correct him? I can message Floodlight. She can relay the message, fix it. Izuku thought for a second. It didn't really bother him, just surprised him. No, it's fine. I just wasn't expecting it. Maruko raises an eyebrow. You absolutely sure? I can run over there myself and correct them if you want. Izuku shook his head. Seriously, it's not a problem. I just haven't ever been confused for a girl before. Maruko's eyes widened slightly before relaxing. She seems to have realized something, but has no intention of sharing it with Izuku. He doesn't really mind. He's sure she would tell him if he needed to know. Well, you do have an airy voice, and your costume makes your silhouette kinda androgynous. Huh. You all good? I think so. Just checking. Let me know if it changes. Sure. Thank you all watching this video, boys, and goodbyes. Logzo 6 is remarkable. The gray matter degradation has been dramatically reduced. This is still only an experimental operation, so mistakes are to be expected, but Hizu 4 is holding up well so far. I believe that even if this turns out to be a failure, it will still be worlds better than anything we have made before. I simply moo. Log Z14. As correct in my assumptions, Z4 is withstanding the serum far better than other Namu, but it is receiving far less improvements. It seems the greater a subject's mental retention, the less the serum improves their capabilities. This is DISAP. Logja 23. And understand it. It's as if it's refusing the serum consciously. A4 is currently resisting the serum's effects to dangerous levels. I am hesitant to add more quirks into it, as more of its brain will likely be cannibalized in order to control said new quirks. It is appearing, however, that it may be more and more necessary to keep it in line. I just hope. Log 46. Sigh. I don't understand. This was going so well. Where did it go wrong? Hizu 4 attacked one of the manual laborers. It was not active. It should have been locked in its tank. Even after adding multiple more quirks, it appears that I cannot override its base instincts. I have tried everything I can possibly think of. He tells me to have patience, but I will admit I am running out. I have ideas and theories for what to do next, but Hizo 4 must be disposed of. It will sort itself in time. Log end. Logzo 52. I have been granted permission to deploy Hizu 4 in Surukana Prefecture. It has no objective and no goal. Its purpose is a simple combat test, both for my Namu and for the local heroes. I admit to being disappointed. This specimen appeared perfect, and yet it has become one of my greatest failures. Not because it is weak, but because it is unusable despite being so strong. Whatever mental corruption the serum induces renders even him unable to take its quirks back. At least it won't be hungry for a very long time, and if it kills a few heroes in the process, so be it. Dr. Kyudai Garaki's lab reports on subject. He's out for. Oh, Shouto Todoroki. I saw your debut in that riot. Your fighting was very good. Izuku Midoriya. Oh, I saw yours too, although I had to dig for it. But still, it was really impressive. Shouto Todoroki. Thank you. I didn't do much, but I've learned from you that doing something is still better than nothing. Shouto Todoroki. This may be off topic, but I did see the interview with Wave Dash. I don't mean to pressure you, but you know you can tell me anything, right? Izuku Midoriya. I do. I don't even know where Wave Dash even got that idea. Mirko tells me I have an airy voice or whatever that means, and an androgynous figure in my hero suit, but I don't know. I don't really care though, so I'm not going to bother correcting anyone. Wasted effort when I could be saving people, you know. Shouto Todoroki. Alright, as long as that's what you want. But other than that, you're okay. It didn't seem like you got any injuries, but we both know how high your pain tolerance is. Izuku Midoriya. I swear, I'm fine. I barely got scraped. It was a bit nerve-wracking that Mirko just trusted me to hold my own, but afterwards, thinking back, I kind of get it now. I don't want to brag or anything, but rewatching from an outside perspective, it didn't even seem close. Which is weird because in the moment, it seemed like I was barely hanging on. Shouto Todoroki. Firefight was telling me a bit about that. When you're the one fighting, you know what you want, and you know every way it goes wrong. You can recover, but you still know you messed up. But the people watching you don't know that. If you barely dodge an attack, they don't see a near miss. They see you only moving as much as you need to. When you can't recognize where you're messing up, all you see is who won. Izuku Midoriya. Huh? Firefight seems like a good mentor. Shouto Todoroki. He is. He's teaching me a lot about how to interact with people. We'll be working on my fire today, though, so hopefully that goes well. What are you going to be doing? Izuku Midoriya. I think Mirko said something about patrol. I guess I'll see soon. Shouto Todoroki. Then I hope it goes well. Have a good day. Izuku Midoriya. You too, thanks. Izuku turned off his phone and walked out to the living room, where he saw Rumi on the couch. She seemed to be watching the news. Compared to yesterday, it didn't seem nearly as chaotic. Mornin', kid, Rumi said, angling her head slightly to him. Good morning. Do you have any idea what we're going to be doing today? Izuku fidgets with his hands, still a bit nervous around her. She looks over at him and at his hands, but thankfully doesn't comment. Planned on going out on patrol. You all good with that? Izuku smiles. Yeah, I'm all right. Should I go get my costume on? Rumi grabs the remote for the TV and turns it off. Yeah, sure. Before you do, though, what do you want me calling you while we're on patrol? Izuku tilts his head a bit confused. You mean like my hero name or something? No, I mean pronouns. I know you use male pronouns, but you didn't seem to have any inclination to correct people using female pronouns. Izuku can feel himself blush a bit. He's still a bit embarrassed that they thought he was a girl, but it doesn't really matter. It was weird coming from nowhere, but now that he's expecting it, he's not exactly upset by it. Oh, I don't really care. You can use whatever, I guess. Rumi's eyes sharpen, seemingly studying him, before she shrugs slightly and drops it. All right then, go get changed. Oh. Patrolling with Mirko is a bit different from what Izuku expected. Part of him logically knew that most patrols actually rarely encounter villains, but at the same time Miruko's public persona was so aggressive that he'd been unable to picture her doing anything else. Walking down the street with her now, he could see he was wrong. She was still cocky and brash, but she was just the right amount. She wasn't like Endeavor, who seemed like he didn't care about civilians, and she wasn't like Hawks, who seemed so full of himself. Rather, she adjusted her attitude to the people around her, just slightly, to help them feel at ease. After all, if she wasn't scared of a villain, why should anyone else? Mirko could handle it. She was kind and nice, but through a rough and tumble facade. It was interesting, seeing how much she cared, and yet how effortless she made it seem. Izuku was also the subject of a few stares and whispered comments. She's so cool. She really is just a mini bunny. You'd never know someone so cute could kick so much ass, but she'd prove you wrong. It was odd, hearing them and knowing that they were about him. He couldn't help the smile across his face. Even the comments after the sports festival couldn't compare to how he felt now. He was helping a lady move some large boxes into her new storefront at the moment. Mirko was talking to someone out front about possible criminal activity, and rather than just waiting around, Izuku figured he could help. As he set the last box down, the lady smiled at him. Thank you again, miss. It really warms my heart to see you on patrol. Most kids these days think heroics is all about fighting, and I get that it's important, but some could stand to learn the benefits of community service. She shook her head, a grateful look on her face. Seems you already have, though. Thank you again. I'll let you get back to patrol. Izuku turned, and Mirko was leaning by the door, a relaxed look on her face. As he stepped out, she stood up and turned to him. Ready to go, kid, Izuku nodded, and she grinned. All right then, Oh, and by the way, I got these. She pulled out 2 large carrots, freshly harvested. She hands one over to Izuku. This one's yours. Izuku looks at her incredulously as she takes a bite out of one with a cocky smirk. The image is ruined, however, by her doing a perfect impression after a certain bunny he remembers. All that's left is for her to say, "What's up, Doc?" Izuku struggles to keep the grin off his face, even when she puts him in a headlock for laughing at her. They're both giggling, though, and it seems the people around them are also having fun. As they continue around the city, Izuku occasionally pulls his respirator down to take a bite of his carrot. It was still a little goofy to Izuku, but it was good, so he didn't care. It was strange how easily female pronouns came to him. It was weird at first, but even now he was already mostly used to it, which was also confusing. He was male. He had no issues with being called male, and he liked being seen as masculine, so why did he not have any issues with being seen as a female? He was brought out of his thoughts by a nudge on his shoulder. "We're gonna have to get you a new suit, kid," Mirko said. Huh, Izuku just got a new suit. Granted, his old one was basically just a jumpsuit with some pouches and a hood, but still, it's not like his new suit was bad or anything. "We've got to get you a new suit. Yours is still built for punches, not to mention how it's only really a bunny next to me, otherwise it's just a weird green alien thing," she said. Izuku thought about it. After watching himself yesterday, he did have to admit, the bunny theme was really only there because Mirko was next to him. Sure, one could call him a bunny, but it was only really obvious when he was with her. It took him a second to realize that he never actually tried to make his costume a bunny. "Wait, you want me to be a bunny?" he asked, confused. "Duh," she said while laughing a bit. "Kid, you use kicks and have floppy bunny ears, no to mention your hair is fluffy as hell. And you wouldn't be mad at me stealing your theme." "Kid, you're already being called Mini Mirko. Bit too late to go back. But regardless, you're my intern. If anything, it's your theme just as much as it is mine. I'm not the only bunny allowed." She grins a bit, getting a face Izuku already can recognize as teasing. "Plus, I'm a kick-ass bunny. The world needs a cute and fluffy one," she says, ruffling his head a bit, and laughing when he squeaks a bit at the teasing. "Okay," he says a few minutes later. "You'll be a bunny?" He nods a bit, still embarrassed. "Great, we can work on designs after patrol." She looks up at the sky, which is changing to a greenish tone as the sun starts to set. "Speaking of, when should probably start heading back soon?" Oh, it didn't know much. It knew it woke up. It knew it was made. It knew it didn't like the man. It knew the lights hurt. It knew it went through the purple fog. It knew it was hungry. Its jaw opened and opened and opened. It has unhinged itself, gaping maw ready to swallow someone whole. Saliva dripped and pooled on the damp alleyway below it. Lights didn't reach this corner, and yet it could see just fine. Large fangs stretched downwards from its upper jaw, venom practically pooling at the tips. It knew it was hungry. This alleyway was small. This alleyway was dead. This alleyway was hidden. It would make a good den. A good place for its food and prey and findings. Scents hit its towns, which stretched out, forked ends searching for the scent it knew well. It found it. It knew it was hungry. Darting forwards with a speed one could barely fathom, it dashed through the tight corners and pathways off the alleys, carefully avoiding the neon lights of the streets outside, its hulking mass trembling with each leap and step, its reptilian scales twisting and turning and overlapping. It could feel someone just around the bend, an isolated person, someone who started just a bit too far into the shadows. The person screamed when it emerged around a corner. It knew it was hungry. and it knew the city was full of food. Firefight is a really interesting hero. As the rank 3126 now hero, his usage and control of his quirk is extremely good. His unique approach on a fire quirk is what sets him apart from heroes like Endeavor, Burnin, and even Pyre. Rather than using heat and the burning qualities of fire, Firefight opts to use the energy fire gives off to create projectiles with a great amount of force. His quirk, Flare Burst, allows him to create and condense fire. Through careful training of his quirk, he's been able to make fire which burns fast and forcefully, but at low temperatures. Condensing this type of fire allows him to release it, causing a chain reaction which shoots a ball of fire, and upon hitting something, it releases a bunch of force into it. Firefight has stylized his quirk as two flaming revolvers, but he can use it without them. A good example of such is when he used concussive blasts from his palms against Gravekeeper. He can also use fire in the more traditional sense, as he did in his fight against Whiteout. Despite being a combat-based hero and his quirk not aiding I'm rescue efforts, Firefight has not hesitated to volunteer for rescue efforts, providing menial labor on site. Firefight is also a vocal speaker against quirk discrimination. Firefight's real identity is not known to the public. He is one of the few top 50 heroes who prefer to remain anonymous. This is enabled by the Heroes Protection and Integration Act, which allows heroes to withhold their real identity, among other things. Strengths. Despite being a primarily ranged fighter, Firefight has a decent amount of close combat fighting ability. His unique application of his quirk allows for more flexibility on the job. His anonymity allows him to travel within plain sight outside of costume. Due to his inherent understanding of civilian crisis behavior, he has a 2-star command designation. Weaknesses. His fire takes time to accumulate and is often just kinetic force. His identity can also be used against him. Despite being low temperature, he does still use fire, meaning flammable gases can be used against him. He also cares about civilians, which can be taken advantage of. Notes on Firefight, taken from Hero Analysis for the Future, Vol. 13, written by Izuku Midoriya. Oh, it was back. The thirst, it was back, and it was faster again. She needed to find something soon, or else she'd lose control entirely. She'd made that mistake before. Hasu wasn't exactly full of heroes, but when you attack someone in broad daylight, they're going to respond quick. She'd barely gotten out of there when she finally came to. That was the last time she let the thirst get that bad. Shibuya was nice. Sure, she was technically still homeless, but it had nooks and crannies everywhere. She had to bounce around from place to place, but most times she had a roof over her head and her blanket. She'd even stolen a phone from someone on the street and nabbed a charger for it. Not that she had anyone to call, but at least she could look things up. Not to mention the city itself. When night came and the streets lit up with neon, that was just gorgeous. She'd have to leave soon though. The next person would make 9, and the third in Shibuya. The police were bound to realize something was up soon enough, and she didn't particularly want to be around when they did. She would miss Shibuya. It had some really pretty reds. Oh. Izuku was sitting in the living room with Rumi next to the table. It was littered with papers, notes, and sketches. Seemed Rumi was serious about remaking his hero costume. So far, they agreed on him being a bunny. As he didn't have any mutations to do with rabbits or bunnies though, the theme for his suit was more armored and far heavier on support gear than Mirko's. His headgear was the first part of the suit they had finalized. So far it would fully cover his head and had a slight snout along with rabbit ears. Its face would have a light-up display to display emotion and would be see-through from the inside. His main body would likely have armored segments connected by flexible material allowing it to move with him, along with having armored bracers and shin guards. They were still working on the details for it when Rumi got a call. "Hold on a sec, kid. I've got to take this." She stood up, and Izuku caught a flash of the screen. It said the contact calling was the HPSC. As she walked into the other room, Izuku could hear bits and pieces of the conversation. "What? Have an intern on the news, freelance unlike Shurikana, going on. Thought All Might, more than one. Fucking 14. In a day. 30 minutes at most. Got it." Izuku couldn't understand much of what was going on, but he could tell something was wrong when Rumi came back into the room. She had a grim look on her face. "We're gonna have to cut this short. I gotta go handle something." Izuku had figured whatever the call was, it was important, but it still seemed sudden. "What's happening?" Rumi looked like she was debating telling him before she eventually decided to. "I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. You know the Namu from the Asti." Izuku could feel his face go blank as the blood rushed from his cheeks. "What?" "It's still in custody, don't worry. But it wasn't the only one they made. Another one's been dropped in Turkana Prefecture." She waited a moment to let him compose himself. "It's been there for less than a day, and it's already killed 14 people. The HPSC called me to go over there and take care of it." Izuku's eyes widened. "Wait, even All Might barely beat the one at the Astja." He was interrupted by her holding a finger up as he went to continue. "Endeavor, Edgeshot, and Hawks also got called in. The HPSC needs it taken care of quickly and with as little damage as possible. They're pulling all the stops to do it. I'll be fine, but we'll have to finish this later," she said. She didn't like the idea that she couldn't take it on by herself, but she wasn't stupid. If the last one could rival All Might, it was better to be safe than sorry. Izuku seemed to calm down at that. "Oh, that's good." Suddenly his eyes went wide, and he flung his hands out in front of him. "Wait, I didn't mean that you couldn't handle it. I just mean that," Rumi flicked his forehead, cutting him off. "I know, kid. Just worried." She rolled her eyes. "You don't gotta worry about me, though." Her eyes suddenly sharpened, and her mouth tightened into a grin. "I'll beat its ass so bad the Grim Reaper'll be picking up the pieces." Her expression loosened a bit again. "No hero work today, but you have keys for the apartment now. How about exploring the city a bit today? Get used to it." Izuku thought for a second before nodding. "Okay, stay safe," he said as he started to clean up the table. Rumi huffed a laugh. "I'm never safe, kid. I am the danger." Izuku also laughed at that. Rumi headed back into her room, grabbing a bag, before heading out of the apartment. Izuku thought for a moment before realizing that sitting here worrying wouldn't do anything, so he headed to his room to change, ready to take Rumi's suggestion. Oh, Shibuya was an interesting city. It was busy. Izuku knew that from patrol yesterday, but it was different out of costume. While the crowds yesterday had made way for them, now he had to weave through the crowd to get anywhere. Streets were littered with stores and restaurants, each one different from the last. It was like the entire city was one massive mall. There were hundreds of ways to go, and he was sure that he'd find anything he could possibly want, somewhere within the maze of streets. The city didn't stop at night either. Paradoxically, as the sun went down, the city seemed to get even brighter. Neon lights, electronic billboards, lit up storefronts all littered the streets. It was as if the entire city had transformed when night came. It was livelier and more energetic. If daytime was for relaxed, door-to-door shopping, night was for parties, clubbing, and having fun. There were all kinds of people around, and it was an experience he hadn't gotten to see. He was a hero fanboy dedicated to being a hero. He didn't have friends until Yua, and he didn't get out much. This was his first time seeing anything like this himself. Eventually, he found himself walking down a side street. There weren't many people walking down it, most seemingly inside the businesses there. That fact was why, when he heard something from the alleyway in front of him, he thought to check it out. He was a hero student, right? If someone was in trouble, he couldn't just leave them. As he stepped further into the alleyway, away from the noise of the street and the glow of the lights, he saw a figure in front of him. They had blonde hair pulled into two messy buns. Likely a girl then. Not wanting to spook her, he deliberately took a loud step, so she would be able to hear it. She whirled around, and he immediately noticed something was wrong. She was panting aggressively. Her hands were held out to the sides, and she was hunched over slightly. But what stood out to him most was her open mouth and the long canines that he could just barely make out. Hello? Do you need help or anything?" he tried to ask. She didn't respond, but he could see her eyes move to his neck. That's when it clicked. He remembered a conversation he once had with Maru. "Do you know what a blood rage is?" Izuku looked up at Maru, who seemed to be staring at nothing, remembering. No, what is it?" "When someone with a vampirism quirk doesn't drink enough blood, they can go into a blood rage state. Their instincts take over, and they aren't fully aware of what's going on around them. All they know is that they need blood, and their instincts don't care where they get it." "Wait, so they attack people?" "A lot of the time, yeah. You want to be a hero, right?" "Yeah. Then you'll need to know how to identify and deal with vampires in a blood rage." Izuku was 12 at the time when Maru explained how to recognize and pacify vampiric quirks. An aggressive posture, open mouth, and long canines were key indicators that there was a vampire in a blood rage in front of you. All indicators this girl had. She was likely a vampire who had entered a blood rage state. Judging by the lack of bloodstains, though, she likely hadn't attacked anyone yet. He might be able to get her out of it. "If you ever find a vampire in a blood rage, cut your thumb." Izuku's eyes went wide as he looked up at Maru. "Huh, but don't they want blood?" "Yeah, they do. Their instincts know that they can get blood from someone's neck. If you present a more readily available source, though, they likely won't attack. Like I said, cut your thumb and hold out your hand. Be ready to defend yourself, but chances are they'll start sucking on your finger rather than ripping your throat out. From there, it depends, but you're inherently in a better position than you were before." He didn't have a knife or anything sharp, so instead he brought his right thumb up to his mouth, and activating Storm Veil, he ripped open a shallow cut on his thumb. It stung, but compared to breaking a finger, it was nothing. He held his hand out in front of him, and he could see the moment the girl realized he was bleeding. Her eyes snapped from his neck to his thumb, and after a moment she darted forwards. Izuku was ready to defend himself if she showed any form of aggressive behavior, but as she came up to him, she ignored everything else and stuck his thumb into her mouth, sucking the blood out of the cut. Calming down slightly, but remaining weary, the oddness of the situation was now hitting him. Here he was in the middle of an alley with his thumb in some random girl's mouth. He blushed a bit as he realized how this would look if a stranger saw them. Slowly she pulled back. Her eyes had a strange red haze covering them still, but it was less than before. I'm sorry," she said weakly, looking down at the floor in shame. Her body was still tense, her blood rage hadn't been satisfied, but at least she had some control back. He could leave. It was fairly likely she wouldn't stop him, but she might hurt someone else. That wouldn't be good both for them and for her. Examining her for a moment, it seemed she genuinely was apologetic, which also meant he might be able to trust her. "Could you stop yourself if you drink from something right now?" Her head snapped up to him for just a moment, her eyes wide in shock. She then looked over her shoulder again, just as quickly. I don't know. I think so, but I can't be sure. She seemed genuine. She could have just said yes, but she didn't seem to want to lie. Looking at her, she was fairly skinny looking. She was pretty well covered, so he couldn't see any muscles, but vampires were supposed to be physically far stronger than not vampires. Even still, if worst came to worst, he could probably take her down. Having made up his mind, he pulled his collar over his left shoulder, exposing his neck. If you promise to stop when I tell you to, you can drink. But if you don't, I'll warn you that I am a hero student, and that it would count as self-defense. The girl turned back, staring at his neck for a moment before looking at his eyes. You're sure? 100%. She turned back to his neck. I promise, she said softly. Then suddenly she stepped forwards and was far closer than he had expected. He stumbled back a bit in surprise, but was stopped short by his back hitting the wall. Then she was pressing against him, and he could feel her breath on his neck. A moment later he could feel as her fangs began to pierce his skin. It was a millisecond of pain before it was washed away. His nerves were suddenly burning with sensitivity. Every slight rub and movement of his clothes suddenly changed from being annoying to feeling like soft silks. He could feel a blissful warmth where her body pressed up against his. He could feel her teeth in his neck, not stinging, but soothing. Every time her breath hit his neck, he could feel another wave of pleasure course through him. Her leg pressed to his inner thigh, between his legs, was like bliss. His entire body was lit up with pleasure, and he could barely think. She drank, and he could barely form a coherent thought, let alone remember to tell her to stop. He didn't have to, though. Her teeth pulled out of his skin, causing him to shudder slightly. But her lips didn't move from his neck as her tongue ran across the bite wound. He could feel them close up against her, healing in less than a second. And then she pulled away, taking a step back. He blinked for a second, his mind coming back to itself. Aphrodisiac. Vampirism quirks have a common set of mutations, which includes healing saliva and a special aphrodisiac venom. Most can control how much they inject, but it seems like this girl didn't have practice doing so, and instinct wanted him useless. He was lucky she had stopped before she drank too much. That was when he really got a good look at her. He didn't know if it was still the aphrodisiac affecting his brain, if he was exhausted, or if he finally went off the deep end, but looking at her now, she was the most beautiful-looking girl he'd ever seen. It didn't matter that her clothes were dirty and worn, or that her hair had split ends, and that her buns were barely holding together. Looking at her eyes and seeing the haze gone, replaced with shining golden iris and pupils shaped like a cat's, he couldn't help but stare. Her lips, perfectly highlighted, stained red by his blood. Whoever this girl was, he needed to know more. Many quirks come in the form of a somewhat believable or understandable concept. Nearly all Animalia quirks and most mimicry quirks fall under this category. It simply means a quirk that could reasonably evolve from what we know. But then there are what I have dubbed conceptual quirk. These quirks are fiction brought to life. The ideas and concepts at their foundations originate not from biology, but psychology. Take the dragon recurring quirk. There are no hexapodal vertebrae in real life, but the concept of true dragons, ones with 6 limbs, is a frequent occurrence in the fantasy genre. And yet, despite millions of years of standard evolution showing us that hexapodal vertebrae are nigh impossible, quirks have shown multiple converging evolutions into said form. Quirks are known to drastically increase the possible mutations one can have, but 2 separate instances of such an evolution would be cause for intrigue, let alone the hundreds of cases spanning the globe. This isn't limited to dragon quirks either, as many quirks also implement technology into them, and not technology-controlled quirks, But technology mutations, creating guns from one's body, is a common example in America, while in Europe motor-based quirks are common. Many of these quirks originate around a concept or idea that cannot be found naturally in biology. The idea that certain types of these quirks can be found more commonly in certain areas of the world also lends itself to another idea. Quirks often work too well to be just random mutations. When combined with purely man-made concepts appearing in quirks, one might begin to suspect that quirks actively change based on a parent's thoughts and ideas. It's not a secret that the Audi line of heroes came from the owners of the company. Nor is it that the Yamaha family often have audio-based quirks. The question in this case is, how do thoughts influence evolution, and can it be done intentionally? Conceptual quirks written by Jonathan Williams. Oh, this was a scenario he never quite expected to find himself in. For a list of things that stuck out in this scenario, he was in Shibuya at night in an alleyway during internships with a girl who was a vampire who nearly attacked him, who he willingly let drink his blood, who was strangely attractive, and he's pretty sure he just discovered a new kink. Tonight was off to a great start. Blinking slightly, clearing his head from his thoughts, he could hear her mumble a question. "Are you okay?" He managed to murmur out a reply, still a bit out of sorts. Yeah, I think so." The good news was his head was getting clearer. The bad news, she was still just as captivating. Of all the ways to get a crush on someone, I was not expecting becoming a human juice box to be one of them. With his mind mostly clear now, he was able to speak again. "What about you? Was that enough?" She looked up again, golden orbs locking onto his. Without the red haze covering them, or the fog in his mind, he was able to see her pupils were slits, similar to that of a cat's, an interesting mutation, separate from her vampirism ones. Crap, they're so cute, he thought. Yeah, she breathed out, still shocked that he let her drink from him. It was only when he could feel her breath on his face that he blushed. Without his embarrassment suppressed, he realized just how close he was to her. She was still inches from touching him. This was the closest he'd ever been to a girl outside of hero training. Seeing his face light up red, the girl couldn't help but smirk. She found his reaction cute, but she didn't want to scare him off, not after he'd done the nicest thing she could remember anyone doing for her. So she took a step backwards to give him some space. Izuku went to stand back up, rather than leaning on the wall, but when he did, his legs began to shake, and he almost fell forwards. The girl quickly grabbed his arm and held him upright, however, preventing him from face planting on the concrete. "Shit, are you okay?" She seemed genuinely concerned, convincing Izuku even more that he'd made the right decision in trusting her. As she helped him to his feet and he stood up on his own, he was able to answer. "Why, yeah, just lightheaded. Haven't had blood drawn in a while. Forgot how woozy it makes you." The girl just continued to look at him, concerned. Actually, he might be able to fix that sooner than normal. Stormveil enhances everything, right? Then what about bone marrow? That's what generates blood, right? So if he just focuses a small percentage there, he should be able to recoup the lost blood way quicker than normal. Or he could break all his bones, but that's not relevant. Biting the bullet and trying it, he can feel new blood begin pumping into his system. Whoa, the girl's eyes widened, staring down at his hands. Looking down at them himself, he saw why. He could see green electricity every other time he used his quirk, but this time it was happening inside of his veins. Odd visual expression aside, he could practically feel him's veins fill back up with blood. Within moments he stopped, feeling back to normal. That was until his stomach grumbled. Blushing, he looked back up at the girl to see her holding in a laugh. Would you want to get something to eat while we talk?" he asked, staring at the floor. She couldn't hold in her laughter any more, and after giggling a bit, it quieted to a slightly pinched smile. I don't really have money, she admitted quietly. Izuku was able to stand on his own by now, but he still felt a bit weak. Food would do him some good. If you want, I can pay for you. I'd like to ask a few questions about your quirk, if you don't mind. It feels only fair that I pay you back for that. She seems to be in thoughts for a moment before she gains a mischievous grin. So forward of you. Only just met me, and you're asking me on a date. Izuku splutters face going bright red before he mumbles, says the one who had my thumb in your mouth a few minutes ago. His eyes immediately went wide, frantically trying to apologize, but the girl took it in stride. I wouldn't mind doing it again if you'd prefer. Izuku immediately choked on air at that response, but the girl's flirty demeanor was immediately broken by her giggles as he tried to breathe again. I'm just kidding. Lead the way. I won't say no to free food, especially not from a cutie like you. Izuku was sure his face must resemble a tomato by now, but elected to ignore her teasing and began heading to a ramen shop he'd seen while exploring the city that looked good. Oh. So, if you don't mind me asking, how long were you in that state before? Izuku asked, a bit ashamed by his bluntness, but the girl didn't seem to mind. They were seated in a booth at a small ramen shop. The girl paused for a moment, having just drank some broth, before answering. Only about 2 days. I wasn't fully there for about a week, though. She put down her chopsticks and spoon, staring down into her bowl. Honestly, if that was anyone else in that alley, I think they would have died. Izuku nodded slightly. That didn't seem out of the realm of possibilities. It was likely only because he had Maru's advice that their encounter went as well as it did. Looking at her now in the lighting of the shop, he could see just how worn her clothes were. She had a sweater on over what looked like a school uniform. It was obviously fraying and tearing at the seams. He didn't notice it in the darkness of the alley, but it also looked scraped and torn. Not enough to be ripped, but for the outside layer to be roughed up. Her skirt was similar, with more fraying. Her shoes seemed to nearly be falling apart, and her tights had a few small rips in them. Her hair was also wild, sticking up and having split ends and bent strands. He could pretty confidently guess that she'd been on the streets for a while. She took another sip of her ramen, waiting in silence. After she finished, she opened her mouth, seemingly to ask a question, but she stopped. Her eyebrows scrunched up, and she frowned slightly. Why was all she had asked. It wasn't a simple question, though. Why what? Why did I help you? Why did I let you drink from me? Why aren't I mad? Why am I getting you food, or why am I asking? She didn't respond, simply looking down again, her previous boldness once again subdued. I helped because I want to be a hero. That means helping anyone, even people the rest of the world only wants to see as antagonists. Why did I let you drink? Because I know another vampire, and he's told me how to calm vampires in a blood rage down. Or if you're asking why I let you drink from my neck, it's because I didn't want to see you suffer. I'm not mad because I volunteered myself. I let you do it. I'm buying you food because I feel bad asking you these personal questions and expecting to give nothing in return. And I'm asking because I can tell you're a good person, and if there's something I can help with, I want to. I don't think anyone's ever done that for me, she whispered. Izuku smiled at her, hoping to brighten her mood a bit. Well, now, I did. She laughs a bit. Yeah, I guess that's true. She looks back up to him. Thank you. Seriously, I don't think I told you yet, but thank you. I never intended to hurt anyone, but suddenly her eyes go wide. Wait, did you just say you know another vampire? Izuku nodded, confused. Yeah, I did. Then I'm not just some freak. There are other people like me out there. Of course you're not a freak. Yeah, there's a bunch of other vampires. People aren't usually nice to them, but I promise you, you aren't alone. Hearing that from her worried him. He'd already guessed that she'd been on the streets, but had assumed her parents had died somehow. When you live in a world with super-powered criminals, well, accidents weren't uncommon, but no one would believe that they're a freak unless someone they once trusted drilled it into their brain. He clenched his knuckles that someone would do that. Either she left or she was kicked out, but either way, whoever was supposed to be taking care of her had abandoned her and made her believe she was a freak. Sometimes Izuku couldn't understand how people could do something so awful. If you'd like, after we're done eating, I could show you a place you could go to. I'll have to see if there's one in the city, though. The girl's eyes were teary, but she had a slight smile. What is it? It's called Tokyo Gothic. It's a place for those who society treats as outcasts. Heavy mutations, useless, dangerous, or scary quirks, and even no quirk at all. They welcome anyone. Plus, they sell blood packs. Basically juice boxes with blood. They won't remove the thirst entirely, but they'll slow it down. The girl was fully smiling now. She had a few tears rolling down her face, but Izuku, a frequent to crying, knew they were happy tears. Thank you. I never would have known. Even if it doesn't stop them, slowing them down still helps. Izuku pulled out a handkerchief he had, for moments like these, though usually he was the one crying. He handed it to her, and she thanked him again. Hearing her, though, he knew he could help again, but it was going to be really embarrassing to say it out loud. You know, you could drink from me again when it starts to get too much, he mumbled, staring down at his bowl, fidgeting with his hands. You? But you already let me drink from you. Why would you let me do it again? Oh, obviously, I don't mean right now, but I don't want you to go back into a blood rage. Not only does it stop you from doing something you might regret, it also helps someone else too. His face went even more red, thinking about the next thing. Plus, it didn't feel bad, he added. She smiled a bit at his embarrassment, tears dried. How would I find you again, though? Oh, I didn't think about that. I don't suppose you have a phone, he said, putting a hand on the back of his neck with an embarrassed smile. Her face lit up, though, rather than frowning like he'd expected. I do, actually. He was shocked for a moment, before deciding not to comment on it. Then I can give you my number, and you can message or call me when you need to, he said, pulling out his phone. The girl's smile shifted into a coy one. So forward again, giving me your number. He squeaked a bit, the blush that was just dying down returning in full force. Just teasing you. Your reactions are cute. Izuku turned away slightly in a poor attempt to hide his red face. And my number is XXXXXXXXXX. She types it into her phone and sends a simple hello text to confirm she has the right number. Izuku nods, confirming that he'd gotten it. It's getting late, though. You should probably get going, she says after looking at the time. Izuku looked down at his own phone and saw that it was 1:53 a.m., really late. He was going to be exhausted tomorrow, wasn't he? Well, he thought, looking back up at the girl's happy face, it was worth it to help someone. The two quickly finished their food and pay, stopping outside of the restaurant. I guess I'll see you, he says, shifting his weight from one foot to the other nervously. The girl smiles and leans in, giving him a kiss on the cheek before erupting into giggles as his face goes red again and he splutters. Yep, she begins to walk down the street, turning around and walking backwards after she gets some distance. She waves at him and calls out, See you, Kumiko. Huh? Izuku had no idea what she meant by Kumiko. She had turned a corner and was too far away to ask what she meant by that, but he could text her. Izuku Midoriya. Kumiko XXXXXXXXXX. You never gave me your name, silly, so I gave you a nickname. XXXXXXXXXX. And it's too late to go back. You're Kumiko now. Izuku Midoriya. Well, my name is Izuku Midoriya, though I guess that doesn't matter now. Izuku Midoriya. Hey, wait, you never gave me your name either. XXXXXXXXXX. Toga Himiko. And too late to come up with a nickname now. P. Izuku Midoriya. Dang it, I was just trying to think of one. Izuku laughed a bit, saving her number as Toga in his phone. He remembered the time though, and started running back. He really needed to sleep tonight. He had no idea when Mirko would be back, but she would drive him into the ground for the missed time on her mission. He needed to be ready. Thank you all watching this video, and goodbye. Catch the sea hands. Are you an idiot or what? I'm getting ganked up top and you're fucking twiddling your thumbs or some shit. D Thirst 1N3DD 34th. You could have said something, dude. I'm dealing with the dragon. Chill out. Catch the sea hands. What do you mean say something? I have been. The support has asked you to come up here too. D Thirst 1N3DD 34th. I didn't hear you, man. Calm down, dude. Catch the sea hands. I'm telling you right now, I need fucking help on top. Get the fucking dragon's dick out of your mouth and come help me, you fuckwit. D Thirst 1N3DD 34th. It's almost dead. Gimme a second, Jesus, dude. Stop yelling at me or I'm not gonna help you. Catch the sea hands. I need help now. Why the fuck would you play jungle if you're so fucking ass at it? Pull your head out of your ass and do something. D Thirst 1N3DD 34th. You know what? Screw off, you're getting reported. Deal with it yourself. Catch the sea hands. Oh, you're fucking dead, you asshole. Distantly. Kurajiri. Find me this motherfucker. I'm gonna fucking slaughter him. User. Catch the sea hands reported by user. D Thirst 1N3DD 34th. Reason, voice chat abuse and hostility. Verdict, Catch the sea hands has received a 90-day comms ban. Oh, Rikia was keeping a tight control over his quirk, but it was becoming harder and harder to do so. Their protest earlier in the week had not gone the way he had hoped. Apparently their unwarranted attack had been filmed by an unnamed bystander and posted online. The credibility of the organization was going down. Not only that, but it had actually exacerbated the Eurasianist ideologies. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. This was no fault of anyone on his team. They knew it was a risk, but they had taken it anyway. They simply had not accounted for the sudden spike in popularity for Eurasianist ideals. They were becoming far more trouble than they were worth. Their ideals were catching on quickly, and with rumors of a quirk-erasing drug going around the criminal underworld, the number of supporters grew every day. He stood and walked to his window, overlooking the city. The view calmed him, raining in the black spots that had begun to spread from his eyes. Smoothing down the front of his suit, he let loose a sigh. Something would have to be done. Their ideals could not go unchecked. If they could not bury them via the news outlets, then their only other option was to scare them into submission. Their posts and talks had been going around often in online forums. Too long had they gone unchecked. Major news agencies had even dared to publish stories about them. Controversy was money, he supposed, in such a sensationalized business. They were spreading because no one had done anything to stop it. It hadn't gotten so bad that heroes felt the need to step in. But by the time it did, it would be too late. Rikia knew how to control the public perception, and that was a foregone conclusion. Something had to be done. not to silence them, but to destroy them. No one would willingly spread such sentiments if everyone before them was erased for daring to do so after all. No, subtlety wouldn't work anymore, at least not with the QFU. They'd already played their hand, and it had been spoiled by a bad draw. It was at that moment that Curious knocked on the door to his office, peeking in slightly. Rikia turned around, smiling at the sight of his trusted informant. "Ah, Kazuki, good to see you again. I trust you're well." She smiled at him, opening the door fully and stepping inside, closing it behind her. "Very, sir. I have information for you, important information." Raising an eyebrow slightly, he gestured for the seat in front of his desk, as he took his own behind it. "Oh, do tell me." Kazuki's smile shifted to a more sinister one. "I have gained some insight into the movements of the Eurasianists. It seems the failed protest from the QFU has emboldened them. They are staging a march in Hasu soon." Rikia paused, thinking. The hand had been lost, but Rikia was never one to bet all his chips at once. After all, no hurdle is truly insurmountable with the right ambition and effort. The QFU had been exposed as being far more sinister than previously assumed. They would not be able to return to the simple political activist group they once were. But he had just been thinking that a heavier hand would be needed. Perhaps it was time to switch tables. The subtlety of cards would no longer be possible, but perhaps loaded dice may be more to their advantage. Gather troops. The QFU will be mobilizing. It is time to stop the cloak and dagger, at least for them. When the march happens, the QFU will take control of the city entirely. Kazuki gained a shocked look on her face before she composed herself. "Of course, sir, I'll relay your orders. If I may ask, though, how far will they be going?" Rikia turned his chair away from them, staring beyond the city, off to the greater Japan. Out of sight, but it was there nonetheless, and eventually it would be theirs. Whatever it takes. We have been ready for a war for years now. The QFU will simply act as the vanguard. The real war comes after. Our time is soon, Kazuki, just beyond the horizon, and soon it will be within reach. Oh, Rumi had returned earlier in the morning, as Izuku had figured out, when he found the text waiting for him on his phone. "Rumi, I'm here, but I might be out for a while. Fucker definitely didn't go down easy. Not too bad, but I'm exhausted. Definitely gonna be sore when I wake up too. Take the day off again, maybe head to the arcade nearby. They've got some good games. For someone usually so well coordinated, Hawk sucks ass at DDR." Izuku had snorted a bit at that last offhand comment. He figured if Rumi was good enough to make jokes, she'd be fine. Taking a moment to have a bowl of cereal and scrolling the news on his phone, he saw a few mentions of some kind of march happening in Hasu in response to the QFU's attempted framing during the riot. Once again, Izuku found himself glad that Ida's brother had talked him out of going there. It seemed like there was more to the story than what was being said, but there wasn't much he could do unless Mirko got stationed there. Putting it out of mind, he finished his bowl and headed out of the apartment. It took him a bit to find the arcade Rumi had mentioned, but eventually he succeeded, or at least he found an arcade. That was good enough for him. He always had fun at these, cashing in tickets for dumb prizes. It was stupid, but it was funny. Why would he try to save up for the 5,000 ticket drone when he could get 1,000 popping frog things instead? Sitting down to play some games, he noticed a recurring theme. On nearly every game with a leaderboard, someone nicknamed MRKO was at the top. It seemed Rumi's competitive streak had extended even to arcade games. He smiled, seeing that his mentor was equal parts serious and fun. A wild alarm going off at the machine next to him made him turn to see what was going on. Someone had just beaten Rumi's high score in the game, something named Joust. They named themselves Dust, with a decent amount of composure, if their lack of reaction was any indication. Whoa, that's super impressive. Izuku couldn't help but gush. He'd played the game before and barely gotten a tenth of the score this person did. The kid had on a large black hoodie, so it was hard to tell their gender or age, especially considering Izuku couldn't see their face at the moment. His comment seemed to startle the person, though, as they jumped slightly before turning to look at him. And suddenly he was back at the Asji, that pale blue hair and piercing red eyes appearing before him. He was frozen, both in fear and shock. A hand was outstretched before his face, ready to. He was snapped back to reality when a hand wrapped itself around his neck. "Stay quiet, dumbass," the villain whispered aggressively at him. He seemed to dart his head around, looking for bystanders, and upon seeing no one, relaxed slightly. "If I let go, are you going to scream? Because if you do, I'll kill everyone I see, starting with you." Izuku struggled to speak. Shigaraki's hand was crushing his throat, despite his pinky finger being lifted. I won't," he finally managed to choke out. Shigaraki stared at him for a second, seeing the fear in Izuku's eyes. Seemingly judging him to be telling the truth, he let go. Izuku's hands flew to his neck as he gasped for air. He would have bruises there. Hopefully he could find a makeup store to help cover them up on his way back. He chuckled darkly in his mind. This was reminding him of the encounters behind Aldera. Shigaraki was still staring at him, as if trying to figure out what to do with him. "What the fuck are you doing here?" he finally spit out. Izuku looked up at him incredulously. "What are you doing here? Aren't you a villain?" He was playing at a nearby arcade, and the wanted man had the audacity to question him. "What?" Shigaraki actually looked offended at that. "And what? We just aren't allowed to have fun?" he questioned, his eyebrows furrowed in astonishment. Izuku didn't really have a counter-argument to that. Like, on one hand, this was a villain who tried to kill him and Sue, but on the other hand, he was still a teenager, barely older than himself. Shigaraki rolled his eyes. "Dumbass." The two sat there for a moment, neither of them saying anything. Shigaraki finally broke it by asking the most off-topic question Izuku could have thought of. "Do you play League?" Izuku blinked dumbly at him for a moment. "What?" he thought. No," he said, unsure if that was the right answer. "Good. Don't," Shigaraki bit out. "Fucking shitty teammates and stupid ass-com bans," he muttered under his breath. Izuku waited a moment. Was he really about to? Yes, he was. I take it you do," he said hesitantly. Shigaraki nodded. "Yeah, and I regret every second of it." "Then stop." "I fucking wish." The two sunk back into silence. This was single-handedly the weirdest experience Izuku had ever had. "This is fucking weird," Shigaraki said, nearly reading his mind. Izuku couldn't help himself, letting out a little laugh. Shigaraki raised an eyebrow at him. "Sorry, it's just, I was thinking the exact same thing." Shigaraki snorted a laugh out as well, a slight grin forming on his face. Izuku sobered up and looked at Shigaraki contemplatively. "You're not gonna do anything right now, right?" he said, hoping it wouldn't set him off. Shigaraki rolled his eyes. "Nah, these bunch aren't worth my time. I was just pissed off from a League game and needed to blow off some steam." "Oh, that's good." Once again, they fell into silence for a moment. "What about you? Gonna call your heroes?" he said, slightly mockingly. Izuku figured he probably should, but if Shigaraki was going to do something, he would have already. Plus, even if he did, Kirigiri would just teleport Shigaraki out. No, not really a point there. If you say you're here just to calm down, I'm not gonna interrupt that. Plus, you've got a free escape route. Not worth the risk, honest. Shigaraki stared at him, seemingly shocked at his answer. Not so black and white, are you, hero? Izuku frowned. Anyone who thinks the world is just dumb. I've experienced my share of bigotry and hatred. I know that clearly defined sides is just crappy justification to commit heinous acts in the name of justice. Shigaraki smiled a bit, his grin looking eerie with his sunken red eyes and dry skin. Who knew the little hero was more than a symbol on a pedestal? You get it. This world is full of shitty facades. Heroes commit acts just as bad as us villains, yet because they're seen as justified, they are lauded as the heroes. But here's the thing. Sometimes the villain is right. Sometimes you find out your enemy might have been the one who truly wanted to help. Izuku searched Shigaraki's face for a moment. Do you want to help, I mean? Shigaraki's grin turned practically vicious. Nah, I just want to hurt them how they hurt me. But from the ruins of society, I'll be content to let someone else build something better than before. His voice became harsh, dark, seemingly having a presence Izuku didn't know he could have. And when they eventually fail too, I'll do it all again. Izuku shivered at the tone. It nearly froze him to his seat. That was disturbing. He took a moment to compose himself before replying, W, what if you didn't have to tear down everything? Not everything is bad, right? What if you could only take out the bad parts and leave the good? Cut out the infection. Shigaraki focused back on him. It won't work, kid. While the bad remains, it infects the good. The only way forward is to destroy it all. Izuku's eyes hardened in defiance. Not if you can reinforce the good. Help it fight back against the bad. Equal parts destruction and construction. But it can't be done from the outside. Shigaraki paused, processing Izuku's words. You can try, I won't stop you, at least so long as you don't get in my way. But when you fail, I'll be there to bring them to their knees. He stood up, stepping back from Izuku. Oh, just a suggestion to that point. Something's happening in Hasu. Might want to stay away. He then grinned a bit. Or knowing you, you might take that as a sign to go rushing in. Whatever you do, be ready. As he finished, he dropped through the floor. Izuku could faintly see the black and purple remnants of Kurogiri's quirk fading away from the floor, leaving no one else in the arcade any the wiser. Oh, what is it? I have a report from the suppliers. And I am occupied getting more samples right now. What is so important that I needed to know now? Well, they're worried, sir. Trigger and Null contain a lot of the same ingredients. With all the activism surrounding the Eurasianist group right now, they think it's only a matter of time before someone turns on them for making Trigger. She heard a glove peel itself off. She didn't dare open her eyes, but she knew it was red. Let me see the report. Here, sir. And then I apologize interrupting this, sir, but it seemed urgent enough to warrant it. Yes, I can see that. I'll have to send Tengai and Katsukami to them. That should be enough to deal with anyone who get ideas above their station, let's say. It would also be good to get some direct insight into their operations. I'm sure they'll appreciate it, sir. Oh, and Tatsuro. Why, yes, sir. I never gave you permission to enter. She could hear his screams. She didn't have to open her eyes to know the man was gone. Now then, let's return to our operation array. Telekinesis quirks are one of the more common variants of quirks. They come in many different forms and expressions, but they all share a common factor. using one's mind to move objects. It is simple, and yet can be terrifyingly powerful, and yet that is simply the outward expression of it. If you were to look at the quirks of the top scientists and researchers of our time, you would be able to see that an overwhelming majority of them have some type of telekinetic quirk. This is due to the genetic conditions required for telekinetic quirks to work. These quirks are not the magical, unexplained force many think they are. Telekinetic quirks work by projecting a field of faint electromagnetic energy via brain waves. This moves the molecules and atoms of an object through space, thus moving the object itself. The mental energy required for this is far more than most humans are capable of. Telekinetic users, however, have far more advanced brains, with nearly 100-fold more neurons capable of firing at any given moment. This allows telekinetic quirk users to process things at much higher rates and understand information others may not. This does, however, come with a trade-off. Telekinetic quirk users are often physically weaker than their non-telekinetic counterparts. Much of the physical evolution that has come about since the dawn of quirks is overwritten by the increased mental capabilities. For those who are uninformed, each generation of quirks has evolved and stabilized compared to the previous one. Generation 1 was powerful and unstable, 2 was weak and unstable, 3 was weak and stable, 4 was strong and semi-stable, 5 was strong and stable, 6 was powerful and semi-stable, 7 was malleable and semi-stable, 8 was malleable and stable, and the ninth generation is powerful, malleable, and semi-stable. Telekinetic quirks fall into these same categories, but often their children seem to regress backwards in quirk generation. Someone with a 6th generation telekinetic quirk is more likely to have a child with a 4th generation quirk than a 7th. It is why telekinetic quirks pop up sporadically and randomly in bloodlines. They are extremely recessive and often overpowered by later generation quirks. To make matters worse, the generation recession is not something the telekinetic user must deal with, but rather their children. Regardless of if they inherit a telekinetic quirk from their parents, the child will likely have a recessed generation quirk. Multiple telekinetic users in a row could possibly recess generations so far that a child is born with a 1st generation quirk, or even born quirkless. Gene therapy is attempting to investigate this commonality, but as it is an under-researched niche field, not much has been made in the way of progress. Published by the International Quirk Laboratory, translated by Dr. Hiro Shinoda. His talk with Shigaraki had left him torn. On one hand, Izuku was a hero student now, actively interning with Mirko. He should report what just happened. But on the other hand, he was a kid who had been scorned by society. He knew what it was like for the world to see you and find you wanting. He knew what it was like to be hated for things outside of your control. Shigaraki was right in some ways. Izuku wasn't a goody two-shoes. He had suffered for far too long to believe in the justice of society. He knew all too often how the system failed people. There were 3 reasons people became villains after all: power, desperation, and revenge. As he walked back to Maruko's apartment, he pulled out his phone. His list of contacts was pitifully small. Just his mom, All Might, Mirko, Todoroki, and Toga Himiko. He hadn't talked to Todoroki in a bit. He might as well tell him about the past few days. Shouto hadn't talked to Midoriya in a few days. He figured he was simply busy, but nonetheless was excited when the text from him came in after patrol with Firefight. Izuku Midoriya. Hey Todoroki, haven't talked in a bit. What's been going on with you? Shouto Todoroki. Firefight has been showing me how to use my ice more creatively. I'm working on modifying the molecular structure of my ice right now. Izuku Midoriya. Oh, that's really interesting. Is it to create a more durable crystal lattice? Shouto Todoroki. It is. Firefight has noticed that my ice is simply standard ice. It isn't an issue when I make large structures, but we are attempting to create weapons similar to Yaoyorozu's quirk. Right now, they are too fragile and shatter with a solid hit. Izuku Midoriya. Oh, that's really interesting. Have you attempted to supercool it? Use your fire side to create steam, which you then immediately lower the temperature of and condense into ice. I don't know if that would work, but I know different phases of ice can be made like that in a lab. Shouto Todoroki. That is a good idea. I'll keep that in mind when I next train with Firefight. On another note, though, how have you been? Izuku Midoriya. Very weird. Shouto Todoroki. That does not help me much. Izuku Midoriya. A lot has happened. Mirko had to go to Tsurukana Prefecture to deal with the Namu there. I explored Shibuya for a while. I found a girl in an alleyway who needed to drink blood. Shouto Todoroki. Knowing you, you probably gave it to her, didn't you? Izuku Midoriya. She needed help, okay. Besides, it didn't hurt. The opposite, actually. I forgot that people with vampirism quirks commonly have aphrodisiac venom. It actually felt pretty good. Izuku Midoriya. Forget I sent that last part. Please. Shouto Todoroki. Screenshot saved. Shouto Todoroki. Never. Izuku Midoriya. I regret everything. Kill me now. Shouto Todoroki. I'm pretty sure Bakugo would get mad. Something tells me he's called dibs on ending you far before you even met me. Izuku Midoriya. Anyway, I'm pretty sure she's homeless and she looks starving, so we went to a ramen place while I asked her some questions about her quirk. Izuku Midoriya. And before you say anything, Shouto Todoroki. That's a date. Izuku Midoriya. It was not a date, Izuku Midoriya. Got him Net Todoroki. Shouto Todoroki. Did you at least get her number? Izuku Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya. Yes. Shouto Todoroki. Izuku Midoriya. Ahem. Moving on. I ran into Shigaraki like 20 minutes ago. Shouto Todoroki. How was that not the first thing you told me? Izuku Midoriya. Because it wasn't all that important. Nothing really happened. Izuku Midoriya. Well, he did choke me for a second, but he stopped after that, and didn't even threaten to kill me after. Shouto Todoroki. Judging from your lack of concern, I suppose you enjoyed that too. Izuku Midoriya. Jesus Todoroki. Shouto Todoroki. You are the one who met a random girl in an alley, let her drink your blood, then went on a date with her and got her number. Shouto Todoroki. None of that is screaming vanilla to me. Izuku Midoriya. Still, he's like 6 years older than us at least. Plus, he looks like he hasn't been introduced to the concept of moisture. Not to mention, he's a villain that tried to kill us. Shouto Todoroki. So what I'm hearing is that if the girl was the one choking you, you'd be into it. Izuku Midoriya. I don't even know how to respond to that. Shouto Todoroki. I'm not hearing a no. Izuku Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya. You are not. Shouto Todoroki. So you admit it. Izuku Midoriya. I will not say anything else about it. Shouto Todoroki. You definitely do. Grinning at his phone, Shouto turned it off after Izuku didn't answer for a few minutes. He wasn't entirely sure of what happened with Shigaraki, but if Izuku wasn't concerned about it, Shouto wouldn't be either. He was currently in his bedroom at Firefight's apartment. It was fairly small, but that was fine by Todoroki. Larger places brought back bad memories. Shaking his head of his thoughts, he stood up. Firefight apparently had a mission today, which he would be tagging along for. It was apparently a joint mission with Current, an electrokinesis hero. They weren't too highly ranked, preferring good work over popularity, but it just made them more component in Shouto's eyes. Oh, Arriving at the rendezvous point, Shoto immediately noticed a familiar face, or rather familiar hair. With the wild spikes and vibrant yellow hair, it was fairly obvious who this was. Kaminari. Or now that they were on their mission, Charge-a-Bolt. Firefight spoke up, raising a hand in a wave. Current, nice to see you round here. The woman, dressed in some type of light metallic armored suit, turned to them. Occasionally, the armored sections would have rounded poles sticking out from it, with a ring cut just below the top of them. She wore a large backpack which seemed to be made of copper wiring on the inside. Occasionally, electricity would jump between the poles and crackle in the air. Firefight, good to see you too, you cowboy. Shoto could hear the man let out a soft huff of laughter. Yeah, well, heard you needed some extra. He twirled his fingers, a small flame igniting in his palm. Firepower, he said. Kaminari seemed to have noticed him if the wide eyes were any indication. Shoto waved at him, a simple hello. Kaminari broke into a relieved grin and walked over to him as their mentors continued their conversation. Hey, good to see a familiar face here. I wasn't expecting to see anyone for a while. Shoto nodded. I was assuming the same. The only interaction with anyone else I've had so far is texting Midoriya every now and then. Kaminari lit up. Oh, how's he doing? We haven't heard anything from him. Fairly well, though I'm not sure how much I believe that. Kaminari scrunched his eyebrows. Well, he is always going way too far beyond. What happened this time, though? Shoto tightened his lips, thinking. I am fairly certain that he's into getting choked. Kaminari blinked at him, stunned. What? Firefight then clapped a hand on both of their shoulders, stopping the conversation. We're about to start the mission. Y'all ready? And so Kaminari's stupor was put to the side. The raid seemed fairly standard. There was an abandoned apartment building apparently being used as a base of operations for drug deals here. Thankfully, unlike the last patrol Shoto was a part of, these were all common street drugs, and neither Trigger nor the new drug, apparently named Null. As the four of them approached the building, they were given their orders. Kaminari was to follow Current, providing electricity for her and taxing opponents who got too close. Todoroki was supposed to seal off the exits with ice, preventing their escape. Firefight would enter from the roof of the building and clear it downwards. Fairly simple plan. The only issue was the homeless group who had also taken up residence in the building. That meant not everyone inside was a combatant, and they had to be careful. Don't let their guard down, but they couldn't just attack anyone they saw. Firefight reached the roof of the neighboring building, and Shoto had been sent to the back entrance. On Firefight's signal, they entered. Using the technique Midoriya had suggested, Shoto created a police battering ram, creating a block of ice, then melting it, and nearly instantly cooling the steam back into ice. It was entirely clear, pure of imperfections, and it was made up of large crystalline shapes. Light bent and twisted through it as he picked it up, slamming the battering ram at the back door's handle to flew open, and immediately startled the few people there. He forged the battering ram again, forming a long police baton in his right hand. On the ground, he yelled. Two of the group immediately dropped to the ground on their knees, heads down on the floor, and hands clapped behind their necks. Another two looked frozen in shock. The final one appeared enraged, dashing towards him, fist enlarging as he pulled it back for a swing. Flaring up his left side, he threw a fireball near the man's foot. Not close enough to burn, but enough to startle him. The man stumbled, and Shoto swung the baton upwards. It connected solidly with the side of the man's chest, sending him stumbling backwards. The two startled men seemed to regain control of themselves, and one attempted to dart off. Trapping his feet in ice solved that problem quickly. The other, seemingly bolder than his partner, ran directly at him, while the first aggressor regained his balance. He swung his arm, throwing the baton, after coating it in ice again. The crystalline structure shattered on the inside, destabilized, and as it slammed into the second man's face, it shattered. Nothing cut him, but it was certainly startling, and denied them a weapon. The first man had recovered, and once again took a swing at him. He formed a tower shield in his right hand, and braced. The man's fist slammed into the hastily made shield, and shattered it. Todoroki had intended that though, and as he was pushed slightly backwards from the force, he released another fireball at the man's chest. It never reached him, energy burning up from the frigid air. It did, however, set off a shock wave as the cold air instantly expanded from the heat, a smaller scale explosion from the one during the sports festival. The man was sent flying backwards onto his back. A simple ice wave covered his arms and legs, locking him onto the floor. The second man had recovered by that point, and suddenly sunk into the ground. Shadow darted his head around when something slammed into his back. He grunted at the unexpected hit, but obviously no one had taught the man how to punch, as it lacked any real power. Forming a large hammer in his right hand, he swung it around, twisting to look behind him. The hammer slammed into the side of the man's head, and he was again knocked to the floor. Locking him in place as well, Todoroki glanced at the two still on the ground. They would occasionally peek up at him, but based on their shabby clothing and terrified demeanor, he assumed these were non-combatants. Pulling out his zip ties from his pouch, he restrained the three criminals, locking their feet to the floor of the building. The other two he also cuffed, though far more gently than the three attackers. That was protocol, he'd been told. Anyone in an active combat zone had to be properly restrained. Too many heroes had been stabbed in the back by civilians they had saved to risk it. Sealing the doors and windows in with ice, he continued through the bottom floor. Current was awesome. Denki had been a bit hesitant about the offer when he got it, seeing as he had no idea who she was, but he was sure he'd made the right decision by now. Current had nearly completely overhauled his quirk. Some electric quirks functioned like electrokineses, where they could travel through air, but Kaminari's didn't. He could only control the electricity while it was in his body. Releasing enough to reach so far required him to, what did she call it? Plasma conduction. Essentially, he was burning the air with so much energy it turned into a conductor for a bit. But doing that came with downsides too. It took a lot of energy from him, and even though he generated electricity faster than a normal person, he couldn't hold enough, so it had to come from somewhere. Apparently, the things that made his brain work was the backup. He was pretty sure Current called them neurons or something. Whatever. Either war, big zap equals big dumb, little zap equals little dumb. Denki was already dumb enough, thank you very much. He did no need to be dumber. He was perfectly fine at his normal level of modest stupidity. The perfect line between funny dumb and sad dumb, where he reached comedic ascension. So when Current suggested a way to use his quirk without draining his batteries, he was pretty glad. Transitioning from a ranged fighting style to a melee one was a challenge, but actually being able to count on his quirk during a fight and staying in it, if the shock didn't end, it was more than worth the effort. He picked it up pretty quickly though. According to Current, he might have ADHD and dyslexia, which she suggested he try reading ancient Greek for some reason. She waved him off when he asked why though, saying that he wouldn't get the joke. In the few days since his internship, he'd gotten far better. With a few small updates to his costume, he now had copper knuckles, giving him padding for a punch, but allowing him to tase as well. He also had a few metal discs on his costume, allowing him to arc electricity across the suit, adding intimidation, so when Current told him to clear the next room, he was ready. Stepping in, he was greeted by three thugs staring at him. One was a large, bald guy. His arm hair on his right arm seemed to extend way farther than normal into some kind of whip. The other guy held a box of thumbtacks, a few floating up, near his other hand. The last one, a woman, seemed to have a cat mutation and was bearing sharp claws at him. "On the ground now," he yelled, hoping his shout didn't betray his fear. Judging on the widening grin of Baldy, it wasn't successful. Grimacing, he slammed his knuckles together and flared with electricity, arcing to anything metallic within 5 feet. A small current formed as he pulled his hands back, and once they were far enough away it broke, the tips of his gauntlets still sparking with electricity. Thumbtack Guy seemed to hesitate, but the cat lady didn't. She lunged straight at him, hand out, ready to slash him. He stepped to the side, while gliding his knuckles over his forearms. He heard the click of his new support gear activating. Short-range tags. After he punches Omion, it would stick copper tags onto them, which would allow him to fire short-range, targeted shocks with far less energy cost. The cat girl stumbled to her feet, and he lunged forwards, fist slamming into her arm as she slashed at him again. He heard another click as one of the tags stuck to her arm. The small shock from the punch was already enough to make her freeze for a moment, her hair standing up straight. The more powerful shock he connected to the tag afterwards made her crumple to the ground in pain. It wasn't pretty, but too much electricity in the wrong spot could kill someone. Incapacitating them in pain was better than risking killing them, as Curran said. He heard something drag across the ground and dove forwards, slamming against the floor, just as the hair whip cracked into where he had been standing. Scrambling to his feet, he charged at the large man when he saw a flash from the corner of his eye. Slamming his foot down into a dead stop, he leaned backwards, just in time for a few thumbtacks to go flying past his face and salami into the opposite wall. The whip wound up again, and Denki was running out of options. Charging his fist up with electricity, he braced his right arm with his left, and suddenly a loud crackle was heard. Denki blinked out the duplicates in his vision and ignored the heat on his knuckles. The larger man had been launched backwards. His clothes had scorch marks all over and seemed burnt, but his groans from the floor told Denki he was alive. The last guy turned towards him, disoriented as well, but far less than Denki. Just as he appears to ready an attack, a current arced off of Denki's arm guard, the Catwoman's tags, the 2 tags on Baldy, and off of the thumbtacks directly into the last guy's chest, who spasmed for a moment before slumping to the ground. Denki felt his legs become heavy as the adrenaline from the fight left his body. He nearly fell, but Current was there, swinging his arm over her shoulder and holding him up. Did I do a good job?" he slurred, still out of it. "Real good job, kid. Let's sit you down, give you a minute," she calmly told him. Denki grinned stupidly, but this time he did it on purpose, rather than going way he'd made progress. Hopefully by the time internships were over, he'd be able to compete with the rest of the class. It took a bit after the raid for Denki to recover. Luckily, it was just exhaustion, rather than anything serious. Denki and Todoroki had done well, according to Firefight, and Current seemed to agree. Apparently, there were only 12 suspects in the building. Between him and Todoroki, they had taken out 5 of them. Not bad for first-year hero students. After recovering a bit, Firefight and Current gave their statements to police, and Denki was sitting next to Todoroki. It was a little weird. Earlier in the year, the boy had seemed cold and combative, actively avoiding social interaction. Now he just seemed socially awkward. Nice job. I heard you took out 3 guys," he said, attempting to start a conversation. Todoroki looked at him oddly for a minute, and he nearly began squirming when Todoroki finally spoke. "Thank you. I heard you also took out 2, and that you didn't overload yourself. That's impressive," he said, with such sincerity that Kaminari couldn't help but blush at the compliment. Oh, he rubbed the back of his neck with a sheepish grin. Well, compared to some of the stuff you and Midoriya and Bakugo can do, that wasn't anything. He felt a foot tap against his own. He looked up at Todoroki, whose eyebrows were scrunched slightly, and had a slight frown on his face. You don't need to be like us. He turned, staring down the street, and yet as someplace much farther away. It never ends well to compare yourself to others. You'll only end up disappointed. He paused. Denki got the feeling he spoke from experience. Midoriya told me once that the only person you should compare yourself to is the you from yesterday, because as long as you are growing, it doesn't matter where you are in relation to anyone else. You're better than you were before. That's all that matters. Denki sat for a moment. Thanks, man. Todoroki nodded, still staring up at some faraway place. Denki then lit up in a grin. Hey, we should take a picture, celebrate our first successful raid. He then paused, thinking about it. This is your first successful raid, right? Todoroki turned to him with a smile, back in the moment. Yes, this was, but I appreciate thinking I'm good enough to have already gone on one before, he said with a slight joking tone. Shut up, I just didn't want to sound stupid, he huffed, his cheeks burning red again. This kid, who knew that after getting beat up by Midoriya, he'd turn into this. Todoroki then raised an eyebrow. Do you want a picture or not? Yes, I want a picture. Oh. Denki flopped onto his bed, finally having got back from the rest of patrol. It was exhausting, but really cool. He did help on his first raid after all. Speaking of, he needed to tell the class. Kaminari. Guess what I did today, guys? Mina. What? Zero. Hit me with it. Kaminari. I helped in a raid. I even took down 2 bad guys and didn't go stupid mode either. While I would prefer you get a better name for it. That is impressive. Tokoyami. That's cool. Burb. Tokoyami. That was Dark Shadow, but it is impressive progress. Kaminari. I know, right? And guess who else was there? Kaminari. Image attached. Picture of Kaminari and Todoroki on a bench, with one of Kaminari's arms slung over Todoroki's shoulders. They both are smiling, although Kaminari's is much larger than Todoroki's. Yoraka, you saw Todoroki. Yaoyorozu. Why have you not added him to the group chat yet? Kaminari. Kaminari. Fuck. Ida. Kaminari. That kind of language is reprehensible. You are a hero in training. Jiru. I'm assuming that means Dun's face forgot to get his number. Kaminari. First off, rude. Kaminari. Second off, yeah. Yororoka. Boo. Kaminari. Oh wait, he did say he'd talked with Midoriya. Yororoka. Oh, about what? Kaminari. Hold on. I just remembered what he said. I am not entirely sure if I should repeat it. Maita. Did he say something lewd? Asui. Maita. Maita. It's a genuine question. I can't imagine Todoroki willingly telling Kaminari something that Midoriya said that Kaminari wouldn't just tell us. If it was a secret, Todoroki wouldn't have told Kaminari. So the only other answer is the bro code doesn't permit him to answer. Zero. No, he right. It was definitely something lewd. Kaminari. Yeah, it was something lewd. Yaoyorozu. About one of us. Kaminari. No, Kaminari. Sorry, no. I just didn't want you to think Midoriya was a perv. Kaminari. I'm actually pretty sure it was about him. Jiru. Well, now I'm curious. Hagakure. It wouldn't have anything to do with our last conversation about him, would it? Kaminari. I am not entirely sure. Look, I'll tell you guys, but you cannot let either of them know you heard from me. Mina. What do you think we're snitches? Kaminari. Ida is in the chat. Asui. Me and Uraraka will keep him silent. Kaminari. Menacing, but okay. Kaminari. Here goes. Kaminari. To quote Todoroki, I am fairly certain that Midoriya is into getting choked. Several people are typing. Thank you all watching this video and goodbye.